Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto and Hinata prodigy couple. Before I start, please support for more amazing content, and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by Stigma and link in description and support writer. Let's start the video. It was an ordinary day in the lively city of Konoha. The sun was shining, the birds were chirping, the kunai of the local academy students shined in the bright sunlight. All in all, it was a pleasant afternoon. The weather had been good so far this year. Winter wasn't as cold as usual and summer came early, bringing with it warm air and cool breezes. The bright blonde hair of a neon orange-clad boy bounced with every step as he strode towards his rundown apartment. Even the glares of icy hatred penetrating the hyperactive child were quite normal on a day such as this. But Naruto Uzumaki paid no mind to the harsh gazes, not anymore. He walked with confidence in every step as he made his way to his home, ignoring the occasional taunt and the audible hushed whispers from behind his back. Upon reaching his ransacked dwelling, he let out a sigh of frustration. Being sure to lock the door, he laid on his bed, stretched, then slammed his pillow over his face and screamed into it. "Goddamn Sasuke!" His muffled voice decried the popular academy student. "Thinks he's so fucking great just because he's an Uchiha. Fucker pisses me off." He took several deep breaths through his comforter to calm down before removing it from his face. He needed to vocalize his frustration from time to time, and this method suited the bill just fine. What the hell does everyone see in him? He continued his rant mentally. So what if he looks so cool? That's not what being a ninja's about. And he's a showboater with no sense of teamwork. There's nothing professional about him. Hell, even Shikamaru's got more innate talent than he does, and he doesn't even lift a finger literally. After his internal monologue, he sat up and composed himself. Well, he thought out loud, time to get to work. He leapt off his bed and made his way to the farthest corner of his apartment. A long time ago, he discovered that the room below his didn't actually extend to this corner, and instead, there was a mere concrete column that acted as a secondary support to that portion of the building. Placing his hands on the floor over the pillar and sending a bit of chakra into it, a panel that blended in perfectly with the messy ground dropped inward, revealing a somewhat spacious hole that he had dug and lined with steel bars in order to maintain the integrity of the building. After checking the automatic traps that reacted only to chakra other than his own, he smirked and climbed down the hole, setting the floor panel back into place above him. He slid down the hollow aluminum ladder all the way down the structure, completely concealed by the pillar. As he descended, he made sure to check the seals lining the vertical tunnel to make sure they hadn't corroded. These seals he was particularly proud of, alongside the standard explosive tags that he lined inside the hole in case he ever needed to hide his location, sat special markings that projected a powerful combination of ninjutsu and genjutsu. In a nutshell, these seals kept anyone from detecting that the column was hollow. Satisfied that his protective measures were stable, he reached the bottom of the ladder and proceeded through a trap-laden door to his private chamber about 20 feet below ground level. As proud as he was of his hole, this room made it look like a kid's summer project. It wasn't particularly large, perhaps another 20 square feet more than his shitty apartment, but it was all in the spacing. With the exception of the bathroom and a few closets, it was a single square room lined with everything he needed: weapon lockers, bookcases lined with books and scrolls, and even a small forge alongside a scrap metal dump. "Let's see," he muttered to no one while cracking his knuckles. "Where's it gonna be today?" He strode over to a set of mirrors and took a seat while pulling his gaudy jacket off. After that, he removed his shirt and observed his upper arms with an acknowledging nod. He then turned his back to the largest set of mirrors to see the seals he had tattooed so long ago behind his shoulders. Grasping the needle and saturating the tip with ink, he moved his right arm forward and began applying another seal over his tricep, checking the mirrors to make sure he didn't make a mistake. Tattooing a flawless pattern in awkward positions on oneself with only the help of mirrors was difficult, but history had proven that he could do it. Today's tattoos were storage seals, much like the large intricate body art over his shoulder blades. The large ink works on his back already stored dozens of weapons each. The blonde boy thought it appropriate to only seal large weapons in them such as swords, spears, windmill shuriken, and even a pair of scythes. He completed the seal on the back of his right upper arm and began another on the left. These were intended for smaller weapons such as kunai, shuriken, saban needles, hell, maybe even a chain or two to mix things up a bit. After finishing the second seal, he left the miniature station and walked over to his extensive weapon lockers. He opened one of the slim metal doors to reveal rows upon rows of throwing stars, knives, and needles, all neatly lined up to conserve space. He took several dozen of each weapon and systematically sealed them into his new tattoos. Now, he thought to test them. He walked over to a closet, opened it up, and changed his clothes. Instead of the neon orange he wore to maintain his image as the village idiot, he now wore something far less conspicuous. His jacket had a simple camouflage pattern and his long deep red shorts hung loosely well below the knees. He exchanged his blue sandals for a modified pair of Geta sandals with belts that firmly strapped the footwear to him and steel plates screwed into the bottoms. To complete the disguise, he donned the scratched mask of a treacherous ANBU who fell victim to one of his traps a few years back. Of course, he added his own touch to the visage, attaching a deep red mane to conceal his blonde hair and one-way mirrored lenses to hide his brilliant azure eyes from the world. He added one last safeguard to his identity in case his mask should falter and break, a red cloth that covered his face from the nose down. He had noticed a local ninja with the same getup, and it was amazing what a little extra clothing could do. He secured his hidden chamber from the inside and pulled up a floorboard to reveal a grate. After going through the necessary precautions of his seals and traps, he dropped into the tunnel that was below his secret room. Strangely enough, this passage was already here when he constructed his second home all those years ago, but no one ever seemed to use them other than him and an unknown rival. It drove him nuts that there was something he didn't know, but that was why he was here. When he first began to wander the mysterious tunnels, there was nary a soul other than him around. But shortly after his treks began, he ran into someone. That person was accompanied by two others who appeared human but looked off with their multiple scars, stitches, and mechanical enhancements. He didn't get a good look at the leader's face, but he soon learned in later encounters that it was a female of short stature. His term for the fellow opponent was silence, due to the fact that she managed to sneak up on him more times than he'd care to admit. As they encountered each other more, their following skirmishes turned into fights, which quickly led to battles befitting of real ninjas. He knew that the next step was having battles of epic proportions that would create legends. He vowed to himself that he would unearth the mystery of the opposing genius before becoming Hokage, and charged into the darkness. A blue-haired girl walked through the clean halls of the mansion with drooping shoulders. To anyone watching, Hinata Hyuga was the embodiment of depression. After all, who wouldn't be hopelessly grim if one's own family looked down on them for no justifiable reason? She continued down the hall, avoiding anyone she encountered with careful precision until she exited the grounds. Once out of her oppressive home, she dejectedly made her way to one of the districts across Konoha until she reached her intended destination. Producing a key, she opened the door to the abandoned storage room she secretly took over. Anyone who ever noticed her presence disregarded it, seeing as how her position as an esteemed clan member within the village caused people to respect her, even if only because of the title. After locking the door behind her, she uncovered a hidden steel door in the floor and descended the crude wooden stairs underneath. She shut the metal covering and placed her hand over the seal in its center, activating the ever-constant genjutsu that kept it hidden from all eyes, even those of the Byakugan and Sharingan. She strode down the suspended stairs over the dredged hallway and reached another heavy door, then peered into a small flashing red light, while placing her thumb over a small nib next to the large handle. The nib pricked her finger to extract the smallest of blood samples, and the light blinked twice rapidly in acknowledgement of its creator. The hydraulics that held the covering in place whined as they loosened and the Hyuga girl entered the chamber. "Good evening, Mistress Hinata," two voices said simultaneously as their owners bowed. "Good evening," she returned happily. "Shirori, Aikiru. Any new reports?" Shirori began with a glint of joy in her cold yet warm eyes. "I've collected the samples you asked for." Good, the Hyuga said as she removed her oversized jacket and replaced it with an ivory lab coat. She honestly hated the hoodie, but she needed it to keep up the mask of a shy, introverted preteen. "Any news on Curse?" "Nothing yet, Mistress," Aikiru answered, his ever-present twitch of the cheek accompanying him. "He's either been laying low or covering his tracks better." "It's probably the latter," she remarked. "That bastard's always getting smarter with each encounter." She pulled out a slide of a biological sample from an old freezing container and placed it under a microscope. "Just make sure your brains aren't damaged." "What about the rest of us?" her female attendant asked with way too much enthusiasm. "Doesn't matter so much. I can always put you back together again." She adjusted the device before her, then turned to her idle helpers. "Anything new on the monitors?" "Well, no. You know the drill," she scolded lightly. Her subordinates were special and as such needed continuous direction for their duties. "Continue to map out the tunnels. If anyone other than Curse finds you, avoid detection at all costs. I won't be able to help you if you're taken in." "What if we encounter Curse?" Aikiru questioned. "Do what you always do, try to buy time until I can get there." "Now get going," she ordered with benevolent command. When the attendants left through the secured opening they opened a few years back, Hinata sighed, happy that the duo's conditions were steadily improving, even if they could never be fully normal again. At an extremely young age, the Hyuga found she had a propensity for two things in particular: the medical field and the acquisition of information. She immensely enjoyed the study of all things relating to the physical body and went out of her way to gather knowledge about anything simply because it made her giddy with joy. But when her father threatened her core interests by pushing the clan's traditional ways on her, she rebelled in the best of ways, secretly. She didn't flat out refuse the training he gave her, but rather chose not to excel in front of him, knowing that her succession as the family head would severely handicap her opportunities in life. Interestingly enough, she found the lessons of the gentle fist and its various techniques quite simple, and she took extra measures to ensure that she truly learned the moves in her spare time away from prying eyes. At the same time, she understood that merely seeming to not properly grasp the techniques was not enough to ensure her denial of her future clan position, so she donned the constant illusion of a shy, unconfident, introverted girl. It wasn't a simple task by far, if only because she wanted to clock almost everyone she knew due to their incredible stupidity and short-sightedness. She couldn't stand most of the kids at the academy. They were all just so frickin' dumb. Especially all those girls who fawned over the Uchiha because he was self-centered douchebag. The only people she even remotely respected were Naruto Uzumaki and Irika Yumino. Naruto, because he honestly tried his best even if he was an idiot, and Irika because he wasn't a jackass to the poor boy like everyone else. When she first discovered the abandoned storage room and built her hidden chamber, she began conducting her own research. Most of her studies involved things like biology, genetics, and advanced machinery, but she stumbled across another pastime which transformed her life for the better: espionage. She kept her spying strictly within safe boundaries in case her devices were ever traced back to her, something which in and of itself was highly unlikely. If such a thing were to happen, she would, at worst, be fined severely and potentially watched haphazardly for the remainder of her days, or at least until she could avoid detection altogether. During her early days of monitoring things of interest, one of her favorite locations was the Konoha Hospital, second only to the inner workings of the Hokage Tower. One of her watched patients was a branch family member, a man with the caged bird seal. While she felt sorry for the poor soul because his life was decided by others, she took great interest in his case. The man was desperately ill and always on the verge of slipping into a coma. One day, it actually happened, and before the nurses could respond to the alarm set off by the lack of brain waves, he passed away. That was the day the young girl made a fascinating discovery of the oppressive seal. She had read from her family's archives that the mark only disappeared in death, taking with it the abilities of the Byakugan. When the man slipped into brain death, the seal faded away. But what was remarkable was that his body lived on for a short while before complications snuffed out its flame. The branch member was still alive by all biological standards. With this in mind, Hinata launched herself into a series of experiments to remove the seal from several ailing branch members. She was amazed and disgusted by how many of the subservient family were in dire need of treatment yet kept under wraps by the main house. She conducted her trial runs in secret, most of which were failures. As time went on, she learned more and more about what needed to be done and, eventually, succeeded. Her landmark discovery resulted in the birth of Shirori, the first branch member to be rid of her cursed mark. Of course, in order to make such a thing possible, the blue-haired girl had to partially lobotomize her creation and replace many of the organs and body parts with other compatible materials, including several mechanical devices. Spurred on by her achievement, she produced Ikara shortly afterwards. While having the revitalized Hyugas under her care and watchful eyes, she had them work with her on her many projects. Of course, they could only handle simple tasks, but it was more than welcome because it allowed the studious girl to concentrate on what she wanted. But as of a few years ago, a certain rivalry developed between her and another mysterious individual. It first began when she burrowed into the tunnels already under Konoha and encountered the person she came to coin curse. Thankfully, the person didn't have a clear view of her face at the time, so her secret was safe for now. Nowadays, she lived for two things: becoming the most powerful shinobi in the village by her own power, and proving herself the superior genius. Her eyes shot open when the speaker crackled to life and Shiori's voice broke through. "Mistress, we have encountered curse," she stated calmly. "Proceeding to engage target and await your arrival." Hinata rushed over to the sea of monitors against the far wall and spotted the one corresponding to the camera behind Ikara's left eye to confirm the engagement. Sure enough, those clothes and mask gave it away. "All right," she said to herself to get pumped up for the upcoming fight. She shed the lab coat and donned the dark blue jacket she wore in combat with all its attached electrical and mechanical parts. Donning a mask of the same color and a beige cloth to cover her short hair, she opened the door to the adjacent tunnels and dashed through while it automatically closed behind her. The hunt was on and she was looking for a good fight. Naruto was in the middle of heavy combat with the freaks, his term for the two unusual combatants he repeatedly encountered. It didn't seem to matter how many times he poisoned, stabbed, disemboweled, dismembered, or beheaded them. They always appeared again in the next battle. Fortune was on his side this evening. He managed to sneak up on the two reassembled Hyugas this time, and take out the male after a few minutes with a windmill shuriken covered in explosive tags. The female, however, was a different story. She was obviously constructed for close quarters, although a few of her built-in features consisted of long-range weapons. She bent her legs against the opposite wall and lunged forward, shooting her left mechanical arm forward and opening the electrified claws at the fingertips. Curse countered with a wooden staff he removed from one of his large seals. The claws almost immediately splintered the thing, but it threw her aim off enough for the blonde genius to slash her artificial limb off with a broadsword. Her skills were obviously waning. Normally she would have loosed that arm until much later. He backed off a few steps and chucked the sharpened remainder of his stick at her, using the distraction to pull a second broadsword from one of his shoulder blade seals. He then raised one leg closely against his body and moved his long, curved blades in front of him in a loose gesture. The female freak knelt on the ground with her right knee up. Her pants tore as a compartment opened and a steel tube filled with Saban needles shot forward and blasted out the poison projectiles. The blonde immediately hit the ground on his back and spun himself out of the way with his feet, swinging and striking with his dual blades to deflect any stray needle. He recovered from the spin flawlessly and, using his momentum, sliced the woman's leg off from below the knee. She faltered when her support gave out, but before she could hit the ground the other broadsword cleanly removed her head right above the stitches at the base of her neck. As the consistently revived body slumped to the tunnel floor, the blonde genius felt another presence rapidly approaching. He spun on his heel and struck two stakes out of the air before they plunged into him, denting his wonderfully light swords. So, he addressed his intelligent rival, resorting to this old trick again? "Don't make me laugh," she replied, moving her index fingers down and loading another set of iron spikes into the launchers on her arms. "Those damn blades of yours go hand in hand with this." She moved her hands down, pulling the wires and releasing the catch on her heavy projectile launcher. The metal stakes flew and, as their target moved his dented swords in position, suddenly flew apart into a hail of slivered shrapnel. "Shit!" Naruto cursed as he couldn't dodge in time and took a few large angular chunks to the chest. "Ugh, I hate using this," he complained inwardly as he tapped into the demon fox's chakra and shot the embedded pieces back at his prodigy opponent. He had learned long ago about the source of the hating glares he received, realizing that the dark voice in the back of his head was not a normal thing. Hinata yelped as the shards flew back at her, and she squatted to the ground. She grasped two circular devices on the front of her jacket and pushed the side buttons in, locking them temporarily into place. The large disc on her back, affectionately referred to as yin and yang by her, spun against its small support rails and released a burst of electricity, repelling any metal approximately 3 feet away from the machine. The disfigured shrapnel spun harmlessly back into the air and clattered to the ground. The Uzumaki used this time to move in and, twisting to the side in midair, brought his damaged blades down onto the Hyuga's metal stake launchers, denting them beyond use for the moment. She retaliated by fingering the loose wires at her wrists, yanking them free in such a way that his blades fell into them, and twisting them around the curved weapons, trapping them in place. She moved her pinky fingers and touched the sensitive electrode draped under her hand, and a jolt of electricity surged through the wires and, by association, her opponent's metal swords. He released the energized weapons and leapt back, the steel bottoms of his Geta sandals clanging against the stone floor. He went into a horse stance and released his favorite sword, his custom ninjato. The straight blade had been lengthened to 5 feet, and the blue-haired prodigy noticed several new seals lining both sides. "I've been working on this baby ever since you wrecked it," Curse stated with pride. "Show me what you got." She grinned beneath her blue mask at his eagerness. "You're not the only one with some new toys," she replied as she pulled the pins out of the supports that held yin and yang to her back and the device fell to the ground. She pulled the circular machines on her chest off and pressed the center buttons in. The large disc on the ground began to spin and sharp barbs a foot long shot out of its hollowed center. She applied chakra to electrodes hidden within the machines in her hands, and the top of death began spinning like mad towards the blonde. He moved the sword to the ground to sweep yin and yang away, and it suddenly sprung up into his face. "Shit!" He cursed as he jabbed the blade upwards and caught the large top between two barbs, halting its midair attack. He tried to throw it to the side, but burning steam shot out at his face and propelled the device away. The heat would have been enough to score his face had it not been for the mask. "Damn, that's cool!" he exclaimed as he moved against the bladed disc. "But I've got something new here." He jabbed the ninjato into the ground and the seals along the side began to glow. He pulled the blade up in a vertical swinging motion and a cord of rough stone stuck to the tip and whiplashed all the way down the hall to the Hyuga genius. "Holy hell!" she shouted as she recalled yin and yang and manipulated it to throw itself against the rock. She succeeded, but the whip knocked it to the side and kept on coming. She barely dodged the initial wave in the narrow tunnel, but her intelligent opponent began swinging his sword skillfully in the air, causing the impromptu cord to smash her against the wall and break half the machines in her possession. A small trickle of blood flowed from her mouth, but it was nothing serious. She tried to get up but was held down by the cold steel of her rival's Geta sandal, while staring up against his extended sword. He smiled behind his modified mask. "Looks like I won today. You're out of stuff, ain't ya?" She glared back at him from behind her azure visage. "I've still got equipment left. Nothing I haven't seen before." "Make something better and take me on then," he said as he moved his free hand down to remove her mask. Now to find out Ak. He retracted his hand and jumped back reflexively at the jolt of electricity that resided in a metal rim that was painted the same color of her disguise. Damn it, didn't see that, he thought before addressing his defeated opponent again. That was good, but you don't have any other options. I still won today. She coughed in response as she brought herself to her feet. He continued his mirrored gaze at her while resealing his favorite blade behind his shoulder. It's frustrating to have someone I don't know about down here, but that makes things far more interesting. It's such a pain living with so many dumbasses. Panting hard with the wind knocked out of her, she couldn't help but agree. You're the only person I can count on to keep me on my toes. Silence, he said before taking off into the darkness. Hinata stood there for a moment. Same for you, curse, she returned before collecting her creation's parts. After gathering up most of the pieces, she realized that Shiori's mechanical arm was missing. You son of a bitch! She yelled with a touch of sarcasm to the empty tunnel, knowing full well that he would have it figured out by the next time they met. The next morning, Naruto was beaming as he usually did, except this time he was doing it in the privacy of his own home. He had beaten Silence the night before, and he was ecstatic. He didn't even have to use the full repertoire of his abilities, but then again she didn't delve into her collection of techniques either. He looked over at his alarm clock and realized he needed to get to the academy. As he walked down the street with his head held high and ignoring the whispers behind his back, he couldn't help but add a real smile to the mix of his outward mask. When he reached sight of the building, he remembered that the graduation exams were coming up again. Those were always a pain, but he figured that maybe he should try to pass this time. During the previous exams, he was too busy doing research and perfecting his weaponry styles to give much thought to the useless techniques used in the sub-Genin test. I mean, who the hell uses the clone technique? Those things are freaking useless. He ranted inwardly, equally frustrated that he couldn't actually pull off the worthless move. It really hurts trying to compress all my chakra down to just a simple non-existent clone. Maybe one of those shadow clones I've read about. He continued his mental discussion as he entered the classroom. He slumped down into the first seat available and scanned the classroom with azure eyes. Almost everyone here was horrifically incompetent. The only people who had any real potential, other than himself of course, were Shikamaru, Shino, and Hinata. He could tell the lazy boy was particularly smart. After all, the blonde was the master of disguises. Now if only the Nara would lift a finger to do any actual work. The Aburaim was a bit of a mystery, even to him. He knew all about his clan's insect techniques, and how they housed bugs inside their members, and even most of the inherent strengths and weaknesses guarded closely by the family. It was their attitude that was the hardest of all to crack. They were incredibly secretive in their reactions to everything. Naruto figured his bug-using classmate for someone who had above-average intelligence, and genuinely cared about his associates. All in all, good shinobi material. The Hyuga girl was the only female in his class worthy of being called a ninja. Despite her shy nature, she was reasonably intelligent, and her techniques, while sloppy in the opinion of her asshole family, were far more useful and versatile than any of the wannabe kunoichis. He wondered if her introverted tendencies would get in the way of missions or teamwork, but he had a feeling she could be serious if she tried. Besides, it made her kinda cute. He turned his head to notice the pink-haired girl he liked. In truth, he despised Sakura as much as he did Ino. Both were incredibly vain and wanted nothing more than to impress Sasuke. He figured that his idiot visage would go for her. But come on, who would want a girl as flat as a board with enough room on her forehead to sell ad space? Her personality sucked as well, but that was nothing unusual for the females in the room. It's all for Sasuke, he thought with a mental sneer when his teacher entered the room. Alright, settle down guys, Irika began as he checked off the roll in his hands. Hey, sit down! He commanded to a handful of kids in the back who were especially rowdy that day. When he finished the roster, he addressed the class on the Genin exams coming up the next week. Irika. Now this guy Naruto liked, even if he was a little dim at times. The scarred Chunin didn't treat him like dirt like everyone else, and that was enough to earn the blonde's reserved respect. The only people he held in high regard other than his caring teacher were the grandfatherly-like Hokage, Old Man Tucci and his daughter at the Ichiraku ramen stand, and, of course, the prodigy rival he knew as Silence. If someone ignored the demon contained within him or treated him like they did everyone else without bias, their name went on the short list of people he liked. As the Uzumaki thought about the mechanical arm he confiscated the previous night, the Hyuga watched him from her heightened seat. The blue-haired girl stared at the back of his head, carefully keeping an eye out so she could duck down in feigned embarrassment if anyone noticed her. She knew that, given the lack of self-confidence and self-respect her mask projected, she would be fundamentally attracted to the hyperactive, ever-positive boy. In truth, she actually did kinda like the blonde. He was honest and hardworking even if he was incurably stupid, but there really wasn't a chance that someone like him could get very far in life. It was another sad case of being held back by one's peers that she had seen so many times in the branch family. She allowed her gaze to shift across the room until it rested on a shameful sight: the Uchiha and his fan club. The girls in her class gave Kunoichis a bad name by fawning over this piece of arrogant crap. He was a brooding asswipe who didn't care about anyone, looked down on everyone, and touted his own pathetic skills as superior in a sad attempt to find self-worth. The squealing fangirls crowding around him were no better. What are they, 3? She thought with disdain. If you want to be a ninja, be a damn ninja. Don't prostrate yourselves over this fire-breathing turd. As she vented her own internal fury, she forced herself to think about more pleasant things. She actually felt a bit depressed when she realized yet again that there were very few things to be joyous about other than her private work. She couldn't shake the depressing weight of being alone in a world of stupidity. There wasn't anyone she could talk to. Well, there was Shiori and Ikaru, but they were incapable of holding conversations on the level she desired, much less any kind of advanced thought at the moment. She hadn't completely restored them from last night's engagement. As her mind wandered to how she would defeat Curse next time, she found her mood lifting. This is what she lived for: the thrill of competing with someone who wouldn't falter anytime soon. Someone who could potentially understand her plight. Of course, she would prove herself the superior prodigy, but that would come with time. She was shaken out of her thoughts when Irika shouted at a misbehaving Naruto. Remembering that her mask would giggle at the blonde's outbreak, she unconsciously let it escape as a true feeling. Sure, the boy was an idiot, but that was enough for now. Alright guys, the Chunin announced, on the agenda today is practical applications. That means shuriken and taijutsu practice. Outside, he called, prompting the students to slowly abandon their desks and make their way to the doors. The Uzumaki stayed still in his seat while sprawled out over the table before him. He was feigning a pout since his esteemed teacher yelled at him over a hilarious dirty joke he repeated from a jonin he once saw. When the blue-haired Hyuga passed him, he glanced up at her and noted the immediate blush and attempt to hide in her jacket. He chuckled inwardly. It was plain as day that she had a crush on him and, under normal circumstances, he might have considered returning the affection. But there was work to be done, and he knew it. No time for romance. Irika noticed the shy girl awkwardly avoiding his blonde student and smirked. Ah, to be young again, he thought, totally falling for their masks. The boy leapt to his feet and rushed out the door behind everyone, and the scarred Chunin followed. Naruto sat in his hidden chamber working on the stolen mechanical arm that afternoon. This thing's incredible, he thought. Nothing short of what silence can do. The false limb was a cavalcade of technology. The interior of the smooth metal was littered with electric wiring, equipment, and weaponry. He managed to extract a saw blade of barbs similar to the deadly tops she pulled during the last encounter, along with the electrified claws and the fingers. Poison Saban needles were tucked away in tiny magnetically charged holes hidden by a removable plate, and the batteries he gutted from the upper arm were housed in an incredibly dense alloy that took way too much time to open. Even the way the arm was supposed to be attached to the flesh was brilliant. The transistors and sensors at the shoulder were meticulously laid out to connect directly to the nerves and muscle tissue of the user to give the metal appendage a feeling as natural as an actual arm. Other than the joy he derived from dismantling the device, there really wasn't anything he could copy into his own arsenal. Having a third limb would be painful as hell, seeing as how he'd have to constantly damage his body so the connected nerves wouldn't heal instantly. The space-conserving compartments gave him no ideas since the early part of his life dealt with that very issue. The concept of hidden weapons was also old hat. He once spent the better part of 4 months researching everything he could about the fundamentals of puppetry in battle. While he walked away with extensive knowledge of poisons, chakra strings, and weapons hidden in every corner, the art was ultimately flawed in his eyes. The user would have to carry around a big-ass puppet or a bulky scroll and leave himself open to attack while focusing on a somewhat distant battle. Sure, he still had the lethal dolls he constructed during those times, but he mainly used them for an automated defense system while he was away. He leaned back on the comfortable cot and reviewed the battle in his head. That spinning top of death was pretty cool, he stated mentally. It let out electricity and reacted wirelessly to those his train of thought trailed off when he suddenly rushed to one of his lockers and began frantically pulling out various weapons. Silence's new weapon gave him an idea. A child's toy, is it? He mused while setting out the various blades, screws, tags, and miscellaneous items before him. As he began formulating the inner workings in his mind, he silently challenged his rival. Two can play at that game. He spent the rest of the evening constructing his new weaponry and cheered upon completion. The blonde genius ascended the hidden passage into his ratty apartment and produced a foxy grin before nodding off in his bed. He couldn't wait for the next fight. Hinata sat in the smaller secondary lab underneath her room in the Hyuga compound. This dank hole wasn't nearly as elegant as her main chamber, but putting all of one's eggs in one basket was incredibly foolish. She had spent the better part of the afternoon restoring Shirori and Ikuru to their previous status, and now she was working on altering their mechanical equipment. After finishing all the small changes that came to mind, she sat back and wondered what to do about Curse. The guy really seemed to know his seals, and that was something she had, sadly, not paid so much attention to. She fished out one of the old scrolls she had copied from an old Hyuga text in the clan archives from the hole in the uneven stone wall, and began reading through it on any information that was specific to her bloodline. There wasn't much, but it gave her an idea. She pulled out several tags from the haphazard stack before her and began scribbling out variations on the caged bird seal mixed with elements of other marks that she knew off the top of her head. After a few failed attempts, she came up with a crude yet functional tag. It still contained the central part of the brain-destroying mark, but the outlying area was a combination of an explosive seal and a barrier mark. Theoretically, this seal, when applied to a subject via the tag, would cause extreme pain to the wearer regardless of family affiliation. The small barrier prevented easy removal, although the corners were still unprotected, and if contact was broken after activation, it was set to explode in a small, yet still harmful, fireball. She smirked when she realized that her family's horrendous seal could be put to a professional use other than holding others back. She became alert when the nearby monitor detected her father coming down the hall. She scrambled to the surface and properly set the mat down, thus securing her hidden lab from prying eyes. Her father gave another lecture on proper behavior, strength of the Hyuga, blah blah blah. She stopped paying attention as soon as he began and let her mind wander to what else she could create to defeat her prodigy rival. As high as she neared the end of his ignored lecture, she came up with an idea and, once he was far enough away from her room, returned to her crude underground room to begin preparations. As the night went on, she successfully completed a prototype of an experimental weapon she had been working on the past few years. It wasn't particularly strong now, but given enough time it would become a formidable force, one that would turn the shinobi world upside down if it ever got out. She returned to her room above and fell asleep with a smile on her small face. The next encounter was gonna be great. 4 days later, Naruto found himself prowling around in the mysterious hive underneath Konoha again. As usual, he was slowly mapping out the extensive tunnel system while secretly hoping to be interrupted by silence. He was dressed in his usual alternative garb with a new addition, a handful of rings on his fingers. Every digit possessed one of the circular ornaments, and tiny storage seals were carved all the way around the thick combat jewelry. Ever since his latest victory against his intelligent rival, he had built a wide array of new weaponry based on her top of death, and he was looking forward to testing them. But as much as he craved an encounter with his nemesis, he was just as interested in why these man-made caverns were here. He had never heard any mention of them even from the Hokage, and all the official and unofficial documents regarding the various shinobi locations produced zip in the way of an explanation. Someone's doing something down here, he concluded. They've gotta be. Now the real question is, who? He shook his head to clear his wandering mind as he came upon a massive circular vertical tunnel. When he stepped into the clearing, he peered up and saw a web of stone bridges extending from other tunnels high overhead. He glanced over the side of his own granite precipice and saw much the same, albeit in the other direction. He backed into the tunnel he exited while pulling out his map. Observing the rough path he took, he estimated that he was somewhere below the Hokage monuments. Right under the Hokage's nose, he thought smugly, and even the old man doesn't know. This'll be fun. He marked his map appropriately, and pocketed the guide before heading back into the descending hole. Hinata decided that today was a day for exploration. She had successfully rebuilt Shirori and Ikuru and left the reassembled Hyugas to their daily tasks of monitoring all her points of interest and filtering out useless or meaningless materials. They might not have been alive in the traditional sense, but they were still incredibly helpful. As she moved through the tunnels, a green LED light thrummed softly on her hip as her electronic guidance system updated itself by calculating her newest route. The nifty little device continuously scanned the surrounding area and fed the data wirelessly to the powerful mapping machine back in her main lab. Her dark blue jacket was warm from all the miniature and not-so-miniature devices strapped on or otherwise built into the tough fabric, and her repaired metal stake launchers gleamed in the dim light. The newest addition to her arsenal was carefully strapped to her left thigh in a slim composite steel holster. The weapon was still underdeveloped in her opinion, as the interior of the machine was ridiculously fragile underneath its custom metal tubing. The simple act of dropping it on the ground could potentially render it useless. She stopped when she reached a break in the dank tunnel that opened into a huge subterranean chamber. The guidance system's small light flashed furiously as its microwaves suddenly had to bounce back from all over the place in the spacious pit. Once it settled down, the Hyuga girl nudged a switch from inside her mask with her nose, and a rough outline of the new location was projected in front of her left eye. She frowned when she noticed that there was an airborne fixture in the map that continuously moved every time the portable device updated. She shut off the projection and peered over the side of her heightened angle and smirked when she saw what was causing the abnormality. She quietly loaded the spike launchers on her arms and took aim at her seemingly oblivious adversary. She wasn't even that surprised when Curse suddenly glanced up and leapt into the air, seeing as how he was a fellow genius who was aware of his surroundings. She fired the exploding metal rods simultaneously, and immediately reloaded the second round while reaching for her newest weapon. This was an excellent day indeed. Naruto dodged the shrapnel spikes with relative ease on his airborne route towards Silence. When she fired another barrage, he jammed his fingers into a passing bridge and swung himself underneath, using the open walkway as a shield against the splintering metal. When the deadly rain passed, he curled his feet around, placed them on top of the bridge, then flung himself towards his nemesis while drawing his twin broadswords from the seals on his back. Hinata smirked behind her blue mask and immediately pulled the pins to yin and yang, unleashing the electrified bladed top against Curse. She inserted chakra into the wireless controls and manipulated the lethal top with deadly precision against the fellow prodigy when he finally brought himself to her bridge. The blonde boy struck the spinning weapon between the curved blades with both swords, initiating the constant current within the top of death. His muscles locked up due to the sudden rush of electricity through his body and, after a few precious seconds of being stuck, willed his arms to fling the device away. The thing hit the ground and a small set of pins on the side suddenly shot out, launching the spinning machine into the air towards Curse. Shit! He swore as he leapt back to avoid being skewered by the weaponized toy. When the top spun past him and began turning to attack from behind, he touched a large seal on the left side of his back and pulled out a long, thick mahogany staff. When the crackling machine neared him again, he thrust the pole out, and the curved blades of yin and yang jammed solidly into the wood, effectively halting the remote weapon's advance. Naruto turned to mock his adversary on the failed attempt but instead faced another hail of shrapnel rods. He cursed incessantly as the long bolts exploded on his sides and showered him with painful steel slivers. Calling upon the fox's chakra, he managed to forcefully eject the metal pieces as his many wounds smoked shut. "The hell did you do that for?" he shouted at Silence. "What?" she replied playfully. "You look fine to me." "Damn you." With that, he raised his hands and applied chakra to the rings on his fingers. The seals on the smooth metal reacted instantly and ejected multiple weapons that appeared to be miniature versions of yin and yang. "That little top of yours gave me an idea." "And that would be?" He smirked behind his modified mask. "Yo-yos of death." He demonstrated by launching the toy-like weapons at Hinata. Small blades curved out of the edges of the lethal playthings as the blonde sent chakra down the wires that connected the devices to his rings. Silence countered without a second thought by loading another set of shrapnel rods and firing them at the incoming buzzsaws. As the flying metal impacted with the opposing weapons, Curse performed a dance with his arms to manipulate the yo-yos back to their original path. The Hyuga, in turn, reactivated the distant yin and yang and forced its miniature steam engines to pry it loose from the heavy staff. As soon as the blades left the wood, the thing spun along the ground with incredible speed until it tangled itself in the copycat weapon's wires. "Damn," Naruto thought as he pulled back on his new armaments, frustrated that his rival already found a flaw with them. An idea struck him, and he began to swing his arms in a circular pattern in front of him. The tangled yo-yos of death reacted to the motion by spinning the same way as the motion transferred down the wires. Within seconds, the tangled metal strands had combined to form one thick cable topped with a chaotic collection of rotating blades. The blonde genius then initiated his next attack by leaping forward, causing the impromptu mess of weapons in front of him to also advance with frightening speed. But Silence was ready for anything. While her nemesis was busy further tangling her top of death within his makeshift cable, he had forgotten one important aspect of yin and yang. As the spinning steel cable of rotating blades neared her, Hinata squatted to the ground and pushed the outer buttons in on her wireless devices. Her remote weapon received the command and its inner generator began to spin. A moment later its magnetic field turned on and unraveled the wiring tangled around it. Since this function was primarily meant to ward off any unwanted metal around the wearer, its oppressive field extended for a certain distance before affecting anything. To put it simply, the cables entangling yin and yang were ripped apart as the metal nearest the device were left unharmed while the magnetic field forced away the strands within its influence. "Oh shit!" Curse exclaimed as his cable was dispersed and snapped into pieces. He cut off the chakra to his rings and the wires extending from the seals fell away as the marks deactivated. In a sudden fit of anxiety, the blonde released his favorite ninjato from one of the seals in his back. He took a deep stance, his Geta sandals' metal bottoms clanging against the stone floor as he did so. Striking his sword into the earth, the seals along the blade's sides began to glow as the earth below was firmly connected to the cold steel of the weapon. The Hyuga instantly recalled the last time he pulled this move. Well, she thought, let's see if this thing's up to snuff. She reached down to her thigh, pulled her experimental weapon from its metal holster, and aimed the slightly curved rod at her rival. She pressed its lone switch with her thumb and the device began to vibrate as its inner workings spun at an increasing pace. When the air around the slanted tube began to heat to unbearable levels, the device reached its maximum output and a brilliant light shone through the opening at the front. A moment later, the machine discharged and sent the intense burning light flying towards the blonde. The demon container genius didn't even have time to think when he saw the flash approach him. Instinctively, he dipped into a rather large amount of the fox's chakra and a visible barrier of evil chakra immediately pulled in front of him. The instant afterward, the superheated light impacted the makeshift shield and the two amazing forces caused a tremendous shockwave as they imploded in a fantastic display of illuminated heat. Hinata was thrown back a good 10 yards by the blast and, when she composed herself, noticed her nemesis also suffered the same fate, as he was now bringing himself to his feet clear on the other side of the devastated bridge. "What was that?" she whispered under her breath. "You idiot!" Naruto berated her once his dry voice returned. "You almost killed me." "So did you. I can't believe you made me use that." He referred to the fox's chakra even though he knew Silence wouldn't understand the correlation. "Me? What about you? I'll bet every high-level ninja within 100 miles felt that." If only she knew how accurate that prediction was. "Who's there?" a voice called down from above them, instantly attracting their attention. The intelligent preteens shifted their alert gazes to the lone ninja at the top of the vertical tunnel with a mixture of shock and horror before glancing back at each other. As soon as they realized they had been exposed to the world, they made a mad dash for whatever salvageable weapons were laying around and scampered away like their lives depended on it. "Commander Takami!" A masked underling appeared before a shadowed figure who was seated on an uncomfortable granite throne. "Our forward scout detected a large chakra spike near Sector 8. "Tell me something I don't know," the figure replied in a bored, decidedly female voice. "Any news on the cause?" "Yes, ma'am. Our scout claimed to have seen two masked individuals fighting in the area. Upon discovery, the unknown fighters vacated the scene." Interesting. Takami leaned forward to reveal a sly smirk adorning her rough lips. "Let's get to know these folks a little better. Alert all squadrons to keep a lookout for them." "Yes, ma'am." With that, the kneeling ninja shimmered out of view. The gruff-sounding woman sat back in her seat. "This is certainly interesting news. I'm sure he'll be as intrigued as I am." An elder man strolled down one of the many halls in the Hokage Tower on his way to one of the numerous conference rooms littering the upper floors. His right side was covered either by bandages or miscellaneous cloth, evidence of a conflict fought long ago, as his features were rough and wrinkled with age. Upon reaching the desired chamber, he opened the door and took his place across from two other individuals in the secured room. "Glad you could join us, Danzo," the elder man greeted. "Good afternoon, Hamura Koharu," the old warhawk replied. "We assume you are here to discuss the events that transpired in Root's former base of operation?" Koharu began. "Yes. I take it that you also felt that presence?" The old teammates nodded. "Several of my subordinates are currently investigating the source, but I believe it's safe to say that whatever it is, it could be disastrous if left unchecked." Hamura spoke up. "I agree completely, but how do you suggest we go about procuring such a power?" "First, we need to locate it. It is only a matter of time until we do so. Such strength can never hide for long." "And what happens after?" the old woman continued. "If we are unable to control it, how shall we dispose of it?" Danzo remained silent for a moment before answering. "I believe our associate is more than capable of handling it." The elders nodded again in agreement. "Now that that's out of the way," Hamura began, "there are other matters to discuss." Naruto was as anxious as could be the next day. He hadn't felt such a rush since his first encounter with Silence. Who knew being caught would be so exhilarating? His restlessness manifested itself in a constant bouncing of his right leg against the squeaking floorboards under his seat at the academy. "I knew someone was down there," he exclaimed mentally as he reviewed the odd chain of events the previous night. "Now the question is, who could it be? That guy we saw didn't have any obvious headband and operative, maybe? Perhaps a spy? Nah, a spy would wear a mask or something. This guy made no real attempts to blend in. If he's an outsider, what's his occupation? Then again, if he's from Konoha, what was he doing down there? Got all this speculation's giving me a headache." Higher up in the stands, Hinata's thoughts possessed similar content. Now that was an adrenaline rush. She speculated on being discovered. "I wonder if that's what couples feel when they're caught in the act?" She giggled at the unusual comparison before recalling the face of the individual who found them. Let's see, he didn't have a village headband, but then he wasn't wearing an ANBU mask either. That means the tunnels really are a secret from most of Konoha, since he felt no need to hide his identity, but if he was ANBU, that might have been his base of operations. She shook her head at the last thought. She had located the Special Forces' main structure some months ago, and, while it also had an extensive tunnel system, it wasn't connected to the mysterious hive she and Curse had been exploring. Wait a minute! She realized, the ANBU Black Ops are an offshoot of another organization, a what was it, Root? Yeah, that's it. But it was disbanded some time ago, wasn't it? She shook herself from her inner monologue when she noticed Irika, yet again, berating the blonde boy. Per usual, she giggled a bit at the boy she was supposed to have a crush on and began to wonder if there would ever be anyone for her. Her utmost respect laid with curse even if he was her rival in the prodigy department, but what would happen if the guy was much older than her and only appeared younger due to his short stature? Such a thing shouldn't matter, but the Hyuga couldn't bring herself to contemplate such thoughts. After all, she was still a girl. As Hinata stood in silence over her depressing future prospects, the blonde genius sat back in his seat and mentally planned out his day. After classes he would have to spend several hours pretending to practice with shuriken and such. He still had an image of the village idiot to uphold. Afterwards, a trip to Ichiraka's ramen stand would be in order, seeing as how their noodles were freaking great, and the old man's daughter was kinda cute, even if she was too old for him. This last musing caught him unawares on a subject he skirted around quite often. He would tell himself that he was still 12 years old, romance in his life was still a long ways off, but the simple idea that he would eventually want to settle down one day bothered him. Interestingly enough, it wasn't the notion of having a family that disturbed him rather than who he would be having it with. His ideal girl was, first and foremost, at least intelligent enough to hold a decent conversation with him. Strangely enough, he considered looks to be secondary as long as she wasn't a complete circus freak. After a few solid minutes of daydreaming, he banished such thoughts from his overactive imagination and continued his plans on what to do about the now inhabited secret tunnel system. As the blonde failure drilled ninja stars into wooden targets, Hinata performed her ritualistic stalking of the boy. Occasionally, if the location was rather populous, the Hyuga would decide to exercise her skills in stealth and easily sneak by large crowds of people undetected. Today, however, was not one of those days. She made no obvious effort to stay hidden from her crush should he ever decide to turn around. As usual, Naruto felt her presence behind him anyway. He thought it sad that her life was so oppressive that she secretly leaned on his visage of a moron for emotional support, but what could he do about it? He hammered away at his piss-poor training, almost wincing every time he missed a target, which was painfully often. It angered him to no end that his own village would potentially look down on him despite the fact he was the greatest thing to happen to them since sliced bread, figuratively speaking. When a shuriken finally stuck into the bull's eye, he cheered as he usually did and pulled another projectile from his frayed pouch. As he prepared to launch the next ninja star, he chuckled slightly at the notion that his target was Sasuke's brooding face. He decided to show off a bit and expertly launched the weapon dead on, striking the center of the wooden post right next to his previous scoring hit. The blue-haired girl observing the scenario frowned ever so slightly at this. The Uzumaki boy was notorious for being unskilled as a ninja, but she would notice every so often that he would do something brilliant, even if those moments were brief enough to be attributed to luck. She wondered over this for a moment before deciding that she had stalked the boy enough for the day and started towards home. She had made leaps and bounds in the development of her energy weapon since its first field test, and she longed to work on it some more. The blonde genius felt the girl's presence depart, and decided to hang around a bit longer to ensure no one else was watching. When this turned out to be the case, he gathered his weaponry and headed for home. There was much work to be done. The third Hokage was drowning in paperwork as he usually did. "I'm a master ninja for God's sake," he complained mentally, "not a damn accountant. Why do I have so much paperwork?" When he peered up from his desk from what seemed like days, he noticed that the natural lighting in the room was waning. The Earth's star was setting, leaving behind a brilliant palette of oranges and yellows that illuminated all they touched. Deciding that a break was in order, Sarutobi strolled over to his living quarters within the central tower. When he reached his private room and took a seat on the comfortable couch, he refilled his pipe and took a deep whiff of his oral fixation. He blew a pristine stream of smoke out and began formulating his thoughts on a curious incident from the previous evening. Sometime late last night he felt a disturbance of some sort. The ground didn't shake and even the vast majority of the village's elite shinobi noticed nothing, but a seasoned veteran such as he felt it nevertheless. If he were to describe it, he would have likened it to a shockwave, albeit one of chakra as opposed to vibrations in the air. His exceptional A and BU ninjas reported nothing out of the ordinary, which worried him to no end. How could the cream of the crop in the shinobi world not feel something that strong? Even more disturbing was that his former teammates, Hamura and Koharu, also claimed that they experienced no odd sensations. He knew the council was full of shit on this matter, seeing as how their views tended to be narrow-minded at times. In fact, he produced a frightening thought while sucking in another mouthful of tobacco smoke: they might even be in on it. Only question is, what is it? As the elder Hokage continued enjoying his free time, he had another scary idea. What if that was the demon fox? It would certainly describe the aura surrounding it. Then again, the Nine Tails is capable of much more power. The entire village would have felt it if it was releasing chakra. Deciding to take cautionary measures, Sarutobi made his way back to his office and summoned one of his former A and BU captains, Kakashi Hatake. Breaking routine, The Jonin actually arrived rather quickly given his reputation of being chronically late. You called, sir? The high-level ninja said as he puffed into existence. You're on time for once. Your message said urgent, so I figured it would be good to make time for once. Noble, he brushed the revelation off. Did you feel anything strange last night? Kakashi's lone eye furrowed in a mixture of thought and confusion. No, sir. You too. The lead ninja sat back and murmured to the side. Kakashi, I have a special assignment for you. Sir. The parameters are rather vague, so I'll give it to you straight. Last night I felt a presence of some sort. I don't know whether or not it is hostile or not, but I want you to keep your eyes open for anything out of the ordinary. Such as? I don't know, people not being where they should be, unusual amounts of chakra in places where it doesn't belong, just anything that seems unusual to you. With due respect, sir, these orders seem. The copy ninja paused while trying to think of an appropriate way to phrase his concern. Crazy? He cut him off. Yes, I know I sound like a senile old man right now, but I have a feeling that erring on the side of caution is necessary this time. Any questions regarding your mission? How long is the mission to last? Sarutobi didn't respond for a moment. Even he barely knew what to look for, much less how to assign it to someone else. Indefinitely. This mission is merely to be tacked onto your daily routines, so it shouldn't be difficult. If anything turns up, report to me immediately. Yes, sir. Hinata sat in her makeshift lair underneath her room in the Hyuga mansion tinkering with her energy weapon. The field test the previous evening informed her of a multitude of issues with the amazing device. First off, she was grateful that she and Curse were interrupted and had to end the skirmish because the battery she installed in the curved handle was bone dry. This thing takes a ton of power, she mused. I'm gonna have to improve the batteries or something. I don't really see how I can reduce the energy consumption without also reducing the charge. Maybe if I built a small generator. Her young intelligent mind began working out the mechanics of such an electrical machine. Small my ass. There's no way around it, is there? Well, maybe if I repurpose yin and yang. She unconsciously reached for her lethal top before stopping herself. She always left that nifty little weapon in her main lab. Well, nothing else to do, she thought as she climbed up the short shaft up into her room. She exited her secondary workplace and began resetting all her safety measures over the gaping hole before closing it off and placing the ordinary floor mat over the metal door. The moment the mat left her fingers and fell into place with a soft thud, Hinata was startled by a sudden opening of her door. Her head shot over to regard the visitor with wide eyes. H. Hanabi? She cried, standing up more swiftly than she thought humanly possible. What are you doing, sister? She responded, so surprised that an immediate excuse didn't form in her mind. I tripped on my sandal. You're clumsy, but not that bad, the younger girl retorted. Damn her and her attitude. Was the mat pulled up? Huh. She tried to maintain the illusion of an ignorant klutz by gazing at the mat behind her. Maybe. I might have tripped over it. Hanabi gave a look of dissatisfaction before giving up on the argument. Father wants to see you. Oh, okay, the undercover genius replied as she passed her sibling and started for her father's chamber. Naruto was anxious in his hidden room. Not only was he frustrated at the fact that Silence's newest weapon forced him to rely on the fox for defense, but also by the sudden interruption of the unknown man in the tunnels. His stomach stirred uncomfortably every time he thought about the stranger. I can't deal with this right now. He concluded his evening session and scaled the hidden vertical passage into his room. After properly resealing all the locks, barriers, and traps to his hole, he boiled some water for some instant ramen. After a passable meal, he turned off the lights and lied in his bed, images of days gone by running through his head uncontrollably. Come on, he whined to no one as he tossed and turned. I just want to sleep a little. Even so, slumber still avoided him, and he succumbed to reviewing all the thoughts in his mind. He remembered the first days that he now knew were milestones in his intellectual advancement. One day many years ago, he was playing by his lonesome self when he accidentally released a bit of chakra against the sand under his feet. This mysterious occurrence intrigued him so much that he brought it up to old man Hokage who, recognizing the effects as basic chakra manipulation, informed the young child that he had real potential. Excited by the prospects of learning even greater things, the blonde continued to hone his small skills on his own. When he was of proper age, he enrolled himself into Konoha's Ninja Academy. He had learned off the bat some extremely basic chakra exercises and tried them out in the privacy of his own home, and that was when things changed. The third time he tried a simple exercise in control was his first brush with the demon fox sealed within him. It wasn't so much an encounter as it was him happening by a strange voice in his head that spoke independently from himself. At first, Naruto thought it was normal for ninjas to hear things, but then his interactions with the other students eventually led him to understand that this was not the case. After this revelation, the budding prodigy believed for a while that he was going insane, as the strange deep voice in his mind would constantly berate him and suggest he perform incredible acts of cruel torture and heinous murder. Then one night, the Uzumaki genius finally confronted the foreign voice. When it responded to his questions and demands, the boy finally realized that this spiteful entity was none other than the nine-tailed fox itself. Once he understood that he housed the powerful demon, he wept hard that evening in the knowledge that that was why he was treated with such disdain from everyone. He thought about bringing it up with the third Hokage but decided against it. In his years he had learned that, somehow, people heard everything regardless of how quietly it was spoken. If the villagers knew that he was finally aware of what was in him, they might try to kill him in a bout of vigilante justice. That would not do. On that night so long ago, Naruto vowed to himself to become the greatest shinobi in the village, nay, the world, and prove to everyone just how vain and conceived they were to assume his worth based on events beyond his control. The fact that his brilliant mind absorbed knowledge like a sponge was merely an aid for his goal. With that memory, the boy's eyes could stay open no longer, and he drifted off into the unbiased arms of slumber. Hinata was returning to her room from her overbearing father's chamber. She was fuming inwardly at his incessant negative remarks. He summoned her merely so he could order her not to fail the Genin exam coming up in the next 2 days, and nothing more. "I'll show you one day, old man," she shrieked mentally. "I'll show all of you how big an asshole every one of you are." She checked her ranting in favor of going to bed when she slid open her door and found a sight horrifying to her lavender eyes. "Hinata, what is this?" Hanabi asked as she pointed to the metal door leading to the older Hyuga's secret lab. "I don't know," she replied with as much shock as she could muster. Her mind was in a mix of panic and rage at her snobbish sister. "Why is it in your room?" "I have no idea, Hanabi." She tried to sound nervous as she approached her younger sibling while drawing a small syringe from a pouch in her clothing. "Does father know about this?" the small girl asked while gazing at the floor. "I don't think so," she responded before leaning next to her sister and sticking the needle into her neck. As soon as she injected the cocktail into Hanabi, she continued, "And neither will you." The genius Hyuga moved swiftly to shut the door to her room and replace the mat before attending to her drugged sister. She propped the little girl against the wall and stared straight into her drooping eyes. "You will not remember this," she spoke eerily to the child. "You will wake up and everything will be normal. Do you understand?" When the question was met with a dozing nod, she said, "Repeat what I said." "Everything will be fine tomorrow," the younger sister replied like a quiet drunk. "There is nothing wrong. You will forget about all this. It is a bad dream." "This is just a dream. I'll wake up from," she trailed off before she could finish her statement, and fell into a deep sleep. "All right, let's get you to bed," Hinata said with resolution as she hiked the snoozing girl onto her shoulders and quietly made her way to the sibling's room to deposit her. "Yarji, I hope this hypnotism stuff works." As Danzo dismissed a handful of his root followers, Koharu and Hamura approached him in his desolate office. The room was devoid of character, as furniture consisted of a single desk and chair. Filing cabinets or fixtures that otherwise stored documents were nowhere to be seen, as the very nature of the organization was unofficial, and publicly holding records of its actions was unheard of. "Any news on the presence?" Hamura began. The old warhawk shook his head. "Not as of yet, but my subordinates have found traces of another." "Another person?" Koharu interjected. "Yes, although there is a significant lack of information on them as well. All my forces can find is evidence of 2 combatants, and no more. Nothing to indicate identity." "I see any word from our associate?" "Just our standing orders. It appears he has not taken these intruders into account in our plans." As if the elder people's minds were read, a root member shimmered into view before them in a kneeling position. "Sir," the masked ninja stated, "a message for you." He held out an envelope and, upon being relieved of it, disappeared from the secured room. Hamura's brow furrowed at the means of which the letter was stored. An envelope? Why does he insist on using such arcane forms of delivering messages? It sticks out like a sore thumb. Danzo ignored the observation while he silently read the folded letter from the package. Upon finishing, he handed the letter off to the elders and said, "It appears we now have new orders regarding these 2. As Sarutobi's former teammates simultaneously read the paper, Koharu voiced the important bits. "Recruit said involved individuals upon discovery or, should there will be not for the common good, terminate their terms of employment, and proceed with the operation as planned." Once she saw the dated signature at the bottom, she followed protocol and burned it with chakra-induced flames. "Danzo, I would appreciate it if you would inform us of new occurrences before reporting them to him." "I'm sorry?" the old shinobi said with mild confusion. He knew there was more than one intruder. "What is disturbing about that is I have not submitted a report to him yet. He has somehow figured out the presence of another all on his own." The elder council members merely furrowed their brows in concern before exiting the hidden office. Their associate was proving to be more than met the eye. Shiori and Ikura had been busy for what seemed to be forever. Apparently, they had been working for several days, as their mistress had informed them she was taking a day off for preparations after a sizable workload. Usually that meant she was taking a breather from her time-consuming work, but this day was being set aside for acts of espionage. The reassembled Hyugas noticed quite a few camera signals being set up on their concealed line, and immediately knew what their leader was up to. As they brought new monitoring equipment online, tapped them into the new cameras, and began the extensive recording, they also performed the task given to them that took high priority as of 1 day ago. For some reason or another, Hinata had ordered them to sift through the many radio signals from Konoha in search of anything out of place. They heartily obeyed their savior and got to work on it, but nothing unusual reared its head. There was the normal chatter from all the ninja teams operating within the village, the confidential messages being broadcasted from the intelligence department and the NBU headquarters, and the occasional civilian contractor barking out irrelevant things. They honestly had no idea what their mistress wanted, so they saved all the classified stuff in the hopes that they would be useful one day. Hey, Shiori, Ikura whined, I'm bored. Let's do something. Shut it, stupid. We have to follow mistress's orders. But I gotta live sometime. You're not alive to begin with. You're so mean. It's the truth. As the two's argument degraded into something totally juvenile, the recorder on one of the low-frequency radios picked up a quiet scratch of a conversation. When a pause in the reassembled Hyuga's discussion was filled with a codename foreign to their ears, they broke off and listened in. After several minutes, the static-ridden conversation ended and Shiori turned to her partially alive comrade with a look of triumph. See? That's why we hang around. Fine, he conceded defeat and sat down to filter through the recording and decipher as much as he could. When the Genin exam finally rolled around, Hinata and Naruto were unconcerned about it, not so much out of confidence in their abilities but rather their preoccupation with other more important matters. The Uzumaki, as he predicted, failed the test for the 3rd time. Truthfully, he didn't care all that much about the results, mostly because he was physically incapable of performing the useless technique of making non-corporeal clones. Figures, he mused, just my luck that the deciding move would be one I can't manage. I'm telling ya, it hurts like shit trying to compress my chakra down to a damn clone that can't do anything. He shook his head to clear his complaints while sitting dejectedly on the swing outside the academy. Anyways, I've got bigger things to worry about. Since I failed, there's not much use in training tonight, so I think it's time for a little extra exploration. He was broken from his thoughts by one of the teachers, Mizuki. The Hyuga was disinterested in the new headband that was tied around her neck. Everything in the academy was so incredibly simple that it would be impossible for her to not pass its simple test, but even so, she was thinking about the work she had set up for that evening. Out of the corner of her lavender eyes she noticed Naruto seated on a swing, looking as glum as a human could. Poor guy, she felt sorry for him. He works so hard but is held back every time. Come on, there are other students who've passed without being able to use ninjutsu or genjutsu. Her eyes narrowed when she noticed the blonde boy vacate the scene with Mizuki, but she dismissed it without a second thought. Either way, I've got a lot of crap to sift through tonight. May as well get started. It had been a long night for the demon container. He was just getting home from his alternative exam, also known as assisting that bastard Mizuki betrayed the village. On the plus side of everything, he learned that his benevolent teacher, Irika, was far more sympathetic than he had initially realized, going so far as to take numerous hits for him. His respect for the man skyrocketed that evening. To accentuate the benefits of that night, the blonde boy had also gotten a good look at the forbidden scroll. He had learned the incredibly useful shadow clone technique, which proved surprisingly difficult to learn without assistance, and also taken a gander at a few other moves' instructions. Although he didn't have enough time to try them out, things were definitely looking up. He was disappointed that all this great stuff had burned through his evening and robbed him of a chance to further explore the hive beneath Konoha, but he was satisfied at a job well done nevertheless. He decided to eat some instant ramen and hit the hay. Unbeknownst to Naruto, Hinata was also having a breakthrough, albeit of another variety. After sending Shiori and Ikura on their routine patrol, she had sat down to sift through a variable mountain of data her subordinates had collected in her absence. While there was no lack of notable points, such as some ANBU assassination missions and an assignment to cover up an affair the Fire Lord had been having, there was nothing that pertained to what she was really looking for. Many hours had passed since she began, and she was about to call it a night when she came across a transcript that had been buried in the pile. Damn it, Ikuru, she mumbled. The document was incorrectly filed, an action which screamed of the male reassembled Hyuga. I gotta teach him that this isn't how. Her complaints were silenced as she began to read through the thing. She suddenly tore through the handful of pages to find the documentation on the radio conversation. Upon locating it, she leaned across her expansive desk and pulled the recording that corresponded with the written statement, then played it back. Much of the conversation was garbled and interrupted by long bouts of static, but the audible portions were understandable. Her lavender eyes widened when she realized it was a report of some sort. Dual to base, the recording crackled as Hinata read along in its incomplete transcript. Come in. HQ Dual report. Over. No sign of Zeta class threat. Over. Copy. Any else? Over. Roger. Traces more than one individual. Copy that. Your shift yet? A third, gruff female voice interrupted the dialogue. Keep line clear, fuck. Yes, Commander. Yes, ma'am. The leader's authoritative voice spoke one last time. Dual, return HQ the double more work from Lord Over. Yes, ma'am. Over. While there was more chatter on the recorded channel, the Hyuga genius found this tidbit far more revealing than the rest of the captured transmission. Inuit! She exclaimed as she slammed her hands on the table and rose with a look of triumph. Those guys are taking orders from someone, and something's going down. After her moment of victory, she placed all the documentation back where it belonged and trudged back to her oppressive home to catch some Z's. Genin teams were going to be announced the next morning, and she didn't want to be dead tired. Besides, she had an image of a prim and proper shy girl to uphold. Hinata's morning had been interesting so far. As planned, she arrived at the academy early and took her seat high in the stands to await the team assignments. She anticipated for the day to be rather dull, but all her expectations went out the window the instant she saw Naruto enter the room wearing an official ninja headband. What's this? She wondered, her brow furrowing ever so slightly in thought. When did he pass? I know he failed the test, so perhaps he retook it? No, no one would allow that. However he did it, I think I'll have to keep an eye on him. The Uzumaki was, likewise, having an unusual day. Well, more like a frustrating one. Pretty much everyone expressed disbelief that he passed with them despite their total inferiority. Seriously, he complained inwardly, why can't the academy filter students out more efficiently? Hell, maybe the village hidden in the mist had the right idea, he mused, recalling the Blood Mist Village's novice ninja test of the graduating class fighting to the death in a battle royale. He was shaken from his thoughts when Irika began calling out teams. The blonde was mortified that he was stuck with Sakura and Sasuke, two of his most hated people in the entire city. It didn't help matters when the Uchiha told him to stay out of his way, as if this fire-spewing fuck's going to last on his own. He ranted mentally, barely checking the urge to pull a sword from one of his tattooed seals and slice the boy's head off. If it was just Sakura, I could handle it, he reasoned, but to have both of them on the same squad, what did I ever do to deserve this? The Hyuga, however, wasn't quite as displeased with her new comrades. Shino was definitely the better of the two, as his analytical skills were exceptional for his age, and he kept his emotions sealed up like an ideal ninja. Kiba, on the other hand, was a wild card. To be sure, he had unique prospects in his techniques that could make him deadly merely because his moves were unorthodox, but his strategizing self was damn near nothing. Plus, he stunk to high heaven. No amount of deodorant could cover his scent. The closet geniuses got up with everyone else and took a lunch break. Their Jonin squad leaders were going to pick up their respective teams later that afternoon. The Konoha prodigies had no idea what was in store for them. Kakashi was enjoying his evening as much as he could. He had already met and dispersed his Genin team for the day to prepare for his infamous bell test the next day, and he was kicking back by reading one of his favorite adult novels. He had expected to be charged with the Uchiha boy due to his grafted-on Sharingan eye, but the Uzumaki boy had thrown him for a loop. Thinking back to the unofficial mission the Hokage gave him, he also recalled hearing rumors on how the blonde child failed the initial exam then miraculously passed via alternative means. Lord Hokage mentioned that Naruto passed by learning the shadow clone technique, he mused while reading. Not only that, but he managed to create far more than I could ever hope to. I think I should keep my eye on him, he concluded and brushed the subject to the side. The bell test would determine whether or not he should continue this obscure line of evidence. Little did the copy ninja know that there was one other Jonin instructor going through a similar thought process. Kurina Yuhi was contemplating a strange feeling she had from earlier that day. When she picked up her team of novice ninjas, she immediately recognized Hinata, whom she chaperoned in her earlier days as a shinobi. She felt sorry for the downbeaten girl due to her depressing household and overbearing family. While she was going through formal introductions with her potential pupils, a small tingling feeling formed in her gut. The genjutsu user was not a superstitious person by a long shot. She believed in logical decisions as well as human emotions based on dire situations. While she prided herself on her rather extensive repertoire of all-around knowledge, occasionally she had a gut feeling that told her things were just off. This day was one of those days. The unsettling sensation came around when Kurina eyed Hinata for a few lingering seconds. For whatever reason, she felt like there was some kind of illusion being cast around the girl, not a complicated projection, but it was as if there was some object on the girl that was being protected in some way by the ninja art of genjutsu. She couldn't be certain, but the red-eyed woman felt the minuscule knot in her stomach would not come undone until she had put her mind at total ease. Her final test would provide an opportunity to look into it. Danzo made his way down the old, familiar hallway within the Hokage tower to meet with the elders. Per usual, Koharu and Hamura were awaiting patiently in their secured dwelling. Danzo, Koharu began when the old war hawk was seated, we need to talk about our associate. I am fully aware of your concerns, he answered immediately as if he expected the topic to be brought up, and I can assure you that we still hold the upper hand. How can you be so sure? Hamura interjected. This whole business revolves around secrets. It is unwise to assume that we know everything. I agree, the elderly woman added, there are things that we haven't even told him, and he seems to know about them anyway. Danzo didn't respond right away. He mulled over everything in his mind before formulating a quick plan of action. Consider this, our associate is but one man. That we know of. Despite his seeming omnipresence, we know he cannot possibly be everywhere at once. He is physically incapable of such an act. What if he uses shadow clones? Hamura conjectured. We have never seen the true extent of his abilities. Hell, we haven't even seen his face. We don't even know if it's truly a he. Besides that, Koharu continued, how do you know he does not have spies within our city? Or even within our own shinobi ranks? That is impossible, the scarred man defended his position. All my subordinates are accounted for, and there are no extra heads. There aren't even any additional normal ninjas within Konoha. He has no one on the inside. What about civilians? Civilians would be pointless. They don't have access to any information regarding shinobi material. How about if they are ninjas in disguise? Hamura offered. There have been accounts, if rare, of individuals with extraordinary skills who have been able to hide in plain sight. Like our two phantoms, the elder councilwoman finished. The war hawk merely nodded his head in thought. He would never admit it, but these two fossils had a point. Their associate was a Rubik's Cube of infinite size, a person with no face, no name, and no identity to speak of. The only means of communication with the figure was through letters written to them in arcane lettering and delivered in antique envelopes. They didn't even really have a sure way to speak back. He somehow knew what they were discussing no matter the secrecy of their meetings. His train of thought was interrupted by a knock at the door. Without a needed response, a masked root member entered the room, clutching yet another envelope in his hand. Sir, another message. Not saying a word, Danzo accepted the package and read its contents. His eye widened at the words in the document, and his head shot over to the underling. You. Did you see his face? No, sir. Regular pickup as usual. I see. He calmed himself down. Dismissed. After the masked ninja departed and the door shut, Koharu inquired as to the source of the war hawk's sudden concern. What does it say? It says not to worry too much about secrets. We know all we need to. Rather odd thing to write. Hamura rubbed his chin. Is that all? I don't think you understand, Danzo explained further. He's saying not to worry. He's talking about the conversation we're having right now. 2 days later, Naruto was busy during the daylight hours performing chores under the guise of missions. It irritated him that he was performing mere tasks that the villagers were too damn lazy to do themselves. But considering how close he came to not passing Kakashi's bell test, he was elated that he was doing any official ninja work at all. The blonde genius immediately understood what the one-eyed shinobi was pushing: teamwork. He knew that the real test wasn't in obtaining the bells but rather interacting with his team in the process. While he had full confidence in his own skills, he was honestly worried at one point that they would fail due to the sheer arrogance of the Uchiha and the mindless crushing of the pink-haired banshee. It all turned out well in the end, but it did little to satiate his anger towards Sasuke. I swear, he thought lightly, I'm gonna kill him. I'm gonna black out in a fit of rage one day and murder him. His annoyance for Sakura wasn't much better, but she was tolerable at her worst. The urge to remove her head from her shoulders wasn't as strong. To be sure, some days he felt like clocking her cold whenever she got on a roll about how great the Uchiha was and how much of a loser he was, but doing so would only bring his cover into question. Speaking of which, he mused on a more serious matter. Kakashi's no pushover, he doesn't do it much, but I notice him eyeing me from time to time. Either he's a pedophile with a thing for blondes or he continued with a tinge of fright. He's caught on to me somehow, damn it. It's probably that mass shadow clone technique I pulled. Attracts attention? He smirked at the ironic situation. The one exceptional move he learned in public had the potential to blow his concealed genius. Looks like I'll have to be extra careful from now on. Unbeknownst to the Uzumaki, Hinata was having a strangely similar time dealing with her own instructor. The girl kicked herself mentally when she first met with Kurenai as a genin and noticed the genjutsu user's eyes furrow for a fraction of an instant when looking her way. Damn pouch, she berated herself for carrying around the wrapped piece of cloth that held small instruments such as hypodermic needles and scalpels. I should have left it at home that day. I'm pretty sure she noticed the genjutsu seals around it. No matter, I just have to watch what I'm carrying. As she continued in her mindless chore of an assignment, her mind wandered to other more important things. I checked up with Shiori and Aikaru, but they haven't seen anything on the monitors about Naruto. The guy does his missions, trains till he drops, then goes home. How the hell did pass the Genin exam? It's not like it's hard, but he's failed twice before doing that exact same routine. Why is this time any different? I may have to do some more in-depth research. As Kurenai observed her novice team working away in their training, she sat back against her tree to take in the cool air. The sky was blue with only a few pristine white clouds dotting the horizon, and the breeze was lukewarm in the summer sun. As her eyes drifted between Shino, Kiba and his dog, and Hinata, her analytical brain began to crank away at that funny feeling she had a few days prior. Is it possible that I'm just paranoid? She wondered. They're only genin, but those three worked themselves to the bone during my test. Funny thing about it though, Hinata didn't seem to be as tired as she let on. It's like she was acting or something. She paused for a moment when she noticed said Hyuga performing her duties without error. She's a hard-working girl, but she doesn't have any confidence to speak of. Such a thing would naturally come about from faltering in every little thing, but she's made no mistakes so far. In fact, she outperforms Kiba and Shin in terms of efficiency. She concluded her musings to step in when Shino approached her and announced that they were finished. When his teacher strode over to the Inuzuka and the Hyuga, the young bug user was having thoughts of his own. When they had passed the survival test and truly became a team, he planted a single insect on each member of his squad so he could keep tabs on them in case of emergency. What bothered him was that the bug assigned to Hinata returned mere hours later in a severely disorientated state. Its movements and communication patterns were highly erratic, he mentally reviewed, indicative of contact with one of the very few substances that are poisonous or otherwise harmful to my insects. What is most bothersome is that we keep those substances closely guarded. Only the Hokage should know about them in case of insurgency. Why would Hinata know anything about them? He decided to dismiss any further contemplating on the subject. He had little to no evidence relevant to the situation. That night, Naruto was roaming the tunnels as he so enjoyed. He had made his way to what he called the hub, the massive cylindrical chamber where he last fought silence, and chose a connecting hole at random somewhere near the top. He was about a half hour down the desolate stony passage when he decided to stop and take out his map. After marking the piece of paper up, he figured he was somewhere near an adjoining tunnel of the ANBU headquarters. He folded the parchment up and placed it back in his camouflage jacket when his masked head suddenly shot around when he felt a presence. His azure eyes, hidden behind lenses of one-way mirrors, found something entirely unexpected: a handful of masked men. The newcomers wore the visages not uncommon within the ANBU ranks, but they also wore shrouds that covered their bodies from the neck down. "State your business here," the lead man demanded while grasping a hilt protruding from the cloak. The blonde genius stood and faced the three ninjas with firm resolve. His appearance was certainly jarring, as the red mane that covered his hair made him seem more demonic than human. "They call me Curse," he answered apathetically. "What is your business here?" For a moment, the masks turned slightly and bounced as the shinobi nodded in agreement of something. The commanding man spoke again. "Were you involved with the recent chakra spike?" "What if I was?" he returned smugly. "Then we are instructed to offer you employment in our organization." He raised an eyebrow behind his modified mask. "Employment? What organization?" "I cannot say until you are with us." "Fine. I'm in." "I'm afraid it's not that simple. You have to be inducted and your loyalty proven to lie with us." "No can do." "Then you are a threat and must be neutralized." With that, the trio of shrouded ninjas shot forward, all three drawing swords from their cloaks. Naruto instantly responded by placing his palms over the seals on his triceps, then flinging his hands down his arms, unleashing a wave of shuriken through the normally sealed slits in the long sleeves. As soon as his limbs were outstretched from the movements, he poured chakra into the rings on his fingers and a handful of deadly yo-yos flew out just behind the ninja star barrage. The lead ANBU-like man swung his sword and the force of the following wind batted away the shuriken, but the wires attached to the lethal toys spun around the blade and, when the buzz saws inside the devices made contact with the weapon, shredded it into several large pieces. He tossed the useless sword aside and tossed a handful of kunai at Curse. The Uzumaki reeled the yo-yos back into the marks on the rings and pulled a spiraling metal spear from one of the seals in his back, then knocked the incoming knives away before thrusting it forward and missing the lead ninja. He swung the pike back towards himself to successfully block the other two shinobi's blades, but left himself open to the third man who had maneuvered behind him. The unhindered enemy wrenched a slimmer blade from under his arm and struck at the blonde in one motion. Curse kicked his leg up just in time for the opponent's blade to clash against the metal plates screwed into his Geta sandals before pushing off. The moment he kicked his protruding leg out, he launched himself up and brought the business end of the spear down on the man while kicking his armored feet out at the duo behind him. The ninja now to his front had, in the course of Naruto's split-second travel through the air, unleashed a second slim blade and caught the heavy spear's sharp point with both mini-swords. He grit his teeth behind his ivory mask due to the major impact of the shaft weapon, which was strong enough to create cracks in his small blades before pushing the mysterious intruder away and onto his waiting comrades. The other two immediately slid their long blades free from the armored sandals and sliced into Curse's torso, only to have the prodigy disappear in a puff of smoke. Shadow clone! The leading ANBU lookalike yelled before spinning on his heel to cover his weak point. His comrades followed suit by pressing their backs to his in a basic triangle defense formation that covered all directions in the dim tunnel. Where'd he go? One of the subordinates whispered, his efforts to sense any nearby chakra failing miserably. Just keep your eyes open, the head masked man ordered calmly. He probably used the clone as a decoy to make an escape. Or not, a voice from above countered softly before a pair of armored feet landed on the unfortunate subordinates' heads, immediately trailed by a pair of curved kunai slashing the men's throats. As the recently departed men slumped to the ground, the assumed commander leapt back while tossing his twin blades at Naruto. Said blonde flipped the exotic knives in his hands and caught the incoming swords with the iron loops at the other ends of his weapons' hilts. Done? He mocked as he sheathed the curved kunai into his arm seals, pulled out his ninjato, and went into a low stance to await his opponent. You monster! Damn monster! The leader cursed as he pulled a scroll used for seals from under his cloak. You'll pay for! He never finished his sentence. Instead, his body suddenly stiffened, then went loose and fell to the ground. The Uzumaki noticed a series of hair-thin throwing knives embedded along the dead man's spine before glancing up and finding their owner. What he found surprised him far more than the unexpected trio. Greetings. A small girl who couldn't have been more than 9 years old stood a few yards behind the still-warm corpse. Her interlocking fingers twitched as they fidgeted mere inches away from her face, and she tried to duck her head into her shirt. Her brown hair was neatly pulled back into a messy ponytail, and she wore a large gray raggedish shirt with skin-tight shorts of similar material. Her dull leather belt held 2 large rectangular pouches on both sides and 10 worm-like pieces of intricate metal on the front. She bowed deeply as if she forgot about the formality. And my name is Shia. Curse didn't relax his guard. Despite the girl's projected innocence, she had just killed an ANBU lookalike without any issues. She had to be dangerous. Curse, he answered. What's your business? She continued to fidget. I heard you say you were responsible for that chakra spike a while ago. Is that true? Damn, she stutters as badly as Hinata. What's her deal? He thought before replying. Yeah, what of it? You looking to hire me too? Oh. She yelped in surprise at the statement, as if she never considered it. That would be good. Would you like to help us? Help who? Her eyes dimmed a bit as she looked down in disappointment. I guess that's a no-go. She suddenly brightened up. Oh well, I still have my orders. And they are? To exterminate any threats. She smiled with a blush before something primal changed in her facial features. What the hell? Hinata wondered, how did I get into this situation? The blue-haired girl followed up on her mental whining by firing another set of her shrapnel spikes. The metal rods traveled to the nearest masked man and exploded in a hail of steel shards. The man dodged most of the shots but took a number of hits in the leg. Curse, he is not, she thought smugly. These guys had nothing on her little bag of tricks. The ANBU lookalike who she had just nailed slid to the ground to pull free the slivers in his limb while one of his buddies covered him and the other charged the Hyuga while running through a series of hand seals. The white-eyed girl watched his fingers carefully, then acted swiftly. Eat this! The charging ninja yelled when his hands suddenly crackled with frost. It was a mixture of water and wind elements to create some kind of ice-based technique. He came within striking distance, then thrust his right arm forward while holding the other back for defense. The prodigy's response was simply to reach out and jab a few points along the man's arm, nullifying the chakra in the affected limb. The shinobi cursed and, in the heat of the moment, threw his other arm out only to have it impact something sharp. While the enemy was caught up in his move, he failed to notice another set of spikes loading into Hinata's launchers. He cursed mentally and reflexively pulled his arm back, but it was too late. The moment his flesh cleared the metal, the projectile shot forward with a blast of burning steam and was firmly embedded in the man's arm. A moment later the rod exploded and rendered the limb nothing more than a hunk of dangling meat and bone. The genius girl followed up on the counterattack by jabbing the man in the neck, sending a pulse of chakra to his spine and severing every nerve in the essential backbone. She let the man crash to the ground as his body went into shock and advanced onto the recovering pair. The man guarding his injured buddy lifted his mask a bit to reveal his mouth and spit forth a steady stream of fire. Without skipping a beat, the Hyuga genius ducked and planted her palms on the cold stone of the ground, invoking a solid wall of dirt and granite to rise and block the flames. When it was over, the impromptu soil shield crumbled away, leaving a very much unharmed prodigy staring down the ANBU wannabes through an unbroken mask. The injured ninja pulled out the last of the slivers and attempted to stand. The moment her hobbled onto his foot, though, a cutlass was thrust through his heart from behind, ensuring a bloody death. Gurgling blood before passing on, the shinobi slumped to the ground while the large sword slid out of him as he fell away. "Who the fuck are you?" the final opponent shouted in surprise as he turned to attack the newcomer. In a fit of rage, he buried his sword into the large figure's clavicle with no results. The new enemy merely glanced at the offending blade with disinterest before stabbing its owner with his own large sword and yanking upwards, gutting the man like a fish. When the dead masked man crumpled to the ground, the stranger grasped the blade in him and pulled it out as if it were nothing more than an inconvenience. Hinata was more than shocked to see this guy. Not only was he apparently of a group separate from the ANBU like ninjas, but also he didn't react in any way to the weapon embedded in him. "Who are you?" she asked with a firm voice. "I am called Fumetsu," he replied with a deep, uncaring voice. He was an unshaven, stocky man who wore what could only be described as a ratty poncho with a short-brimmed hat to match. His long shirt and pants matched the crappy brown material of the rest of his clothes and were held in place by a similarly colored leather belt. The only remarkable thing about his outfit was the steel-tipped ebony combat boots partially hidden by the scraggly ends of his pants. "I take it you were involved with that large presence a while ago?" "That's right," she responded while lightly grasping her energy weapon. There was no question that this guy was dangerous. "I have been ordered to neutralize any and all threats." He raised his large cutlass at her. "We will finish this now." Naruto charged the little girl with his sword drawn, ready to strike at a moment's notice. She responded by dipping her hands into the pouches at her side and, in a blur of motion, launching handfuls of narrow throwing knives at the blonde. Curse jabbed his ninjato into the ceiling of the cramped tunnel, twisted sideways, and pulled himself up with the sword seals cementing the blade in place. The knives passed harmlessly mere centimeters from his back and he dropped down while yanking his customized weapon after him. The marks in the steel glowed with brighter intensity, and a long whip of rock followed after the blade. The genius boy hit the ground and began twirling his sword in a circular pattern, prompting the elongated stone rope to rotate across the passage and crash into the walls with great force. Shia merely grinned devilishly before jamming her fingers into the slips of metal at the front of her belt. She pulled her hands back and caught the swift cord over her head, the pieces of intricate metal snugly fit over her fingers glowing with strange glyphs. The whip instantly fell apart into pieces, and she let loose another salvo of throwing knives at the prodigy. "What the hell?" he shouted as he thrust his left hand forward and unleashed a dozen bladed yo-yos from the rings. The devices spun hard in the air and impacted the incoming blades, shredding them to bits before he sent chakra down the wires and forced them to hit the ground and roll speedily towards the girl. He tucked his sword into a loose red sash at his side and flung another series of deadly toys from the rings on his right hand. The mysterious girl shouted, "Is that it? That's all I gotta deal with?" before brushing the ground with her armored fingers. The seals on the metal flashed, and she flexed a few digits seemingly at random. The ground suddenly rolled away from her, then cracked as dozens of jagged spikes jutted outwards and halted the yo-yos spinning along the ground. She then stood and held her arms away from her body, fingers outstretched and clearly showcasing the burning glyphs of the small metal shafts. Naruto cursed under his breath and sent a surge of chakra down the wires of the lethal playthings in midair. With a burst of smoke, the sides burst away from all the yo-yos and the spinning buzzsaws momentum flung pairs of hidden shuriken forward. The weapons then dipped and backlashed into the ceiling as the blonde whipped their control strands upwards. "Ha!" Shia mocked with confidence, "Worthless." She flipped her hands around and a blast of wind howled through the gaps between her digits, knocking the ninja stars out of the air. She then clasped her hands together, and the seals on the metal glowed like mad before she extended her pinky and index fingers. A sudden burst of hot flame streaked down the gust of wind towards the Uzumaki, the ignition source apparently shimmering around her pinkies. "Step it up, curse!" The azure-eyed genius sent another surge of energy down the lines to the playthings embedded in the roof, and the miniature saw blades began grinding against the stone, propelling the weapons forward with sudden haste. He ducked low to avoid wholesale barbecuing and pulled down on the wires, bringing the saws down on his opponent. When he heard her yelp over the crackling of the flames, he lifted his mask a bit and pulled down on the underlying cloth to reveal his mouth and spit out a deluge to counter the searing fireball. The water did so, and he moved his visage back into place before recalling his weapon stuck in the ground. "Ah, clever!" Shia continued to mock him as her hands became blurs and salvos of throwing knives flew from her side pouches. "Try all this, though." She then buried her finger guards into the nearest wall and activated their multicolored glyphs. Naruto resealed the undamaged yo-yos and pulled his dual broadswords from his large seals. He leapt against the wall opposite the one the girl's fingers were attached and began sliding towards her while making the wide swords fly in a spectacular dance as they knocked away the many knives. The blonde prodigy smirked behind his mask when the wall across from him suddenly exploded, sending dozens of shards at him. He chucked the curved swords into the ground before him, and clapped his hands together before thrusting them out at the incoming rocks. The slight breeze caused by his sudden movements was amplified by his chakra, and the wind created by the basic technique sliced through the stones and lowered their velocity. As soon as the danger subsided, he grasped one of his blades and hurled it at his smirking enemy. The strange girl merely punched the sword with armored fingers, and the metal split apart as the weapon shattered. She pulled her hand free from the wall while holding some of the small debris from the earth-based attack and clasped her hands together, and the patterned seals on the metal shafts glowed brilliantly. Kerr saw that his sword was destroyed and was pissed. It's hard forging good swords these days, he complained mentally as he launched himself at the enemy and swung wide with his remaining broadsword. Shia released her hands and countered the blade with an armored set of fingers, and the weapon shattered like its late counterpart. She immediately followed up on her attack and threw something at the boy, something very, very hot. Naruto screamed bloody murder when the pain hit him in the chest, and his arms instinctively clutched the source of his extreme discomfort only to be burned themselves. He hit the ground hard and began rolling on the ground in excruciating agony as his burning fingers clawed at his chest. He eventually regained a somewhat coherent state of mind and looked down to discover that the rocks the girl held had been transformed into molten stone and were searing into his flesh. He remembered that the enemy was still there and would probably follow up on her attack, so he reached for his slung ninjato only to encounter a pair of hands. One grasped him on the elbow and slid up his arm, inciting a new world of pain, while the other stole his special sword with a swift pull. Oh, Shia cooed while eyeing the custom blade. Fancy. She averted her gaze to the writhing form before her. Her stroke against his arm had deconstructed much of the flesh and bone on the limb, and the boy seemed to be slipping into shock. Flipping the sword upside down, she raised it over her head in preparation to end his life. Thanks for the sword. She thrust downward, aiming for his head. She blinked in surprise when the critically injured arm of her opponent shot up, impaled itself on the sword, then grasped the guard below the hilt. The girl tugged once to pull the weapon back to no avail, and released it when the boy stood to his feet. His wounds, she thought, stupefied that said injuries were smoking as they closed. Her eyes shifted to his arm as he pulled the blade from his hand and strained the visible muscle, focusing a strange chakra into the limb that immediately began to heal the severe damage. She then realized that he was no more than 2 feet away from her and moved to put some space between them, but was halted when Kerr struck his smoking arm forward and grabbed her by the throat. "Lego me," she demanded weakly as she touched her armored fingers against the limb and began deconstructing it again with the metal's embedded seals. But before she could force him to let go, Kerr stabbed his ninjato into the ground and curled his larger hand around her finger guards and crushed the metal with an iron grip. Shia screamed in pain as the steel cut harshly into her digits, and she forgot about trying to focus on the hand around her throat. Instead, she moved her free hand over the smoking limb and tried to mortally wound the offending fist, but Naruto was quicker. The masked prodigy merely grabbed the other hand and crushed the unique weapons around her fingers, ignoring the girl's renewed shrieks of pain. Please let go." Her stutter returned as tears flooded her eyes. "I see can't lose and now." "Too bad," was his simple response. He concluded the fight by pulling her up to his face and reeling his head back, cracking his hard custom visage against her skull and knocking her out cold. She went limp in his grasp and he released her to gather up all the fallen and destroyed weaponry around them. After a few minutes, he scooped her light body up and headed back to his secret basement. She'll be a useful source of information, he thought. Overall, a productive evening. Hinata leapt back for what seemed the millionth time since she began fighting Fumetsu. The man had no apparent strategy, no weaponry beyond himself and his cutlass, and absolutely no sense of danger, and that suited him perfectly. "Shit!" she thought as he knocked away yet another exploding spike and garnered a face full of shrapnel without so much as blinking. "Doesn't he even feel that? It's gotta hurt." She reloaded the final sharpened rod and decided against its immediate use. "These are damn worthless against this guy." The undying swordsman said nothing as he strode forward with his sword dangling in one hand and plucking the shards out with the other. He had no expression of emotion, no motivation in his step, and no lust for blood. The genius girl bit her lower lip in consideration of her next move, then reached back and unwound a handful of wires from a bulky coil clipped to her belt. She eyed the footsteps of her opponent, noting that he was not yet clear of the shrapnel embedded in the walls, floor, and ceiling, and touched the ends of the metal strands to her fingers. The wires became magnetized by the chakra running through her hands and dropped them before unlocking their circular holster. The steel cord shot forward, attracted to the special metal of the needle-like shrapnel, and wrapped around them in complicated random patterns that littered the passageway. Fumetsu approached the web of wires and brought his blade down on them to knock them out of the way. The Hyuga smirked when he did so and connected the strands coiled to the repurposed yin and yang, bringing the metal strings to life with crackling electricity. The enemy froze for a moment as the sudden jolt of power surged through his body before bringing his other hand in to slowly continue the task. "What the hell?" she cursed mentally. That's enough power to kill an elephant. How's he not affected? She rushed up to the slowed man and thrust her loaded spike launcher to his neck. She didn't want to destroy his head since retrieving minute bits of information from a deceased brain was not beyond her. She fired and, due to the extreme close proximity of the attack, the bolt passed all the way through the flesh and exited the other side without exploding. Finally, got him shit. Her Byakugan immediately saw him thrust his large cutlass at her, and she caught it with her left hand. The blade scraped against the electrified film on her palm and, although the durable stuff guarded her extremity, she could feel the uneven sharpness glance off the underlying flesh. How is he not dead? She thought frantically. He's got a gaping hole in his neck. Fumetsu pushed forward against the wires blocking his way and into the prodigy girl, while slowly forcing his weapon closer and closer to her. His other hand shot forward and gripped the bottom of her blue mask, initiating yet another shock as it activated a surge of electricity. He ignored the pain as usual and began lifting the visage as silence moved back, revealing the soft lips of the young girl before she opened her mouth and spewed out a thick gas. Poison, the man's dull mind categorized before he got a good whiff of the toxic fumes and lost his grip in a fit of coughing. Something that affects him. The genius girl realized with excitement when she leapt out of the expanding cloud of lethal chemicals. She mixed a bit of chakra with her saliva and spit out a small hail of poison needle-like fluid. Her bloodline saw the wheezing enemy take the full brunt of the follow-up attack, and she smirked as she moved her mask back into place. Had enough yet? She taunted the undying opponent while waiting for the toxins to work their way through his system. He emerged from the thick mist and coughed lightly a few times before continuing on his casual stroll. Advanced techniques for one so young, he commented apathetically, but still not good enough. He brandished his blade and ran a finger along its sharpened edge, extracting no more than a drop of blood. Let this be a lesson for you, he said before licking the life-giving fluid from his digit and moving his foot in a circular pattern. Hinata frowned. Isn't that where I caught his sword? She wondered, glancing at the minuscule cut on her hand and confirming her suspicions. So that's my blood, but what the hell is he doing? She decided that whatever Fumetsu's next was, it couldn't be good. She reached down and pulled her energy weapon from its holster, and the device's cord that connected it to yin and yang hummed as the reworked top's expanded generator spun madly. Bringing the weapon to bear against the man, she saw that he had finished his circle and was starting on another pattern as the weapon in her hand began vibrating with increasing intensity. The enemy's leg managed to paint a single straight line with his own blood, and the cracks in the device were glowing as it reached full capacity. The Hyuga prodigy clamped down on the trigger, and a concentrated blast of heat and light shot from the weapon and struck her opponent. After a few seconds of waiting for the overheated energy device to cool off, she holstered it and strode towards the smoking body to witness the effects of her weapon. Upon reaching the corpse, she determined it to have multiple burns ranging from 1st to 3rd degree, along with total penetration at the point of impact, in this case, the neck. The enemy's head was laying several feet away in a pool of warm blood. He's not getting up from that one, she stated as she knelt down and ruffled through the man's clothes for any kind of identification. She wasn't real hopeful since this man was obviously an assassin of some sort, so she was pleasantly surprised to find a necklace with a gold symbol attached. Her brow furrowed when the mark looked familiar, and she pocketed the jewelry to begin moving the body when she froze. What was that? A distant voice asked. It's coming from down there, another voice replied. Shit, the blue-haired girl grimaced behind her mask. I gotta run. No time for this stuff. Damn. She cut off the wires running from the coil on her belt and took off as quietly as she could. After a few moments, a band of 4 people approached Fumetsu's body and a masked man spoke. Took us a while to find you. You're late, Duel, the disembodied head said as its eyes rolled toward the individual. My apologies, the ninja replied flatly. We started from HQ when you reported in. You're quite a ways away. Whatever. Nina, the undying man addressed the sole female of the mysterious squad, patch me up. As the medic woman obeyed, Duel struck up a brief conversation. Did you follow orders and analyze abilities? Correct. I used no techniques. The mismatched eye behind the visage glanced at the incomplete, bloody seal on the floor. How about that? I figured the target would have an ace up their sleeve if need be. After a few minutes, Fumetsu's head was reattached to his body and he reached for his ratty hat. He placed it on his head and sheathed his cutlass. Let's return to base. The next morning, both geniuses were exhausted from their overnight ordeal. The fighting had taken its toll on the evening and they hadn't slept as much as they would have liked. Of course, they did their absolute best not to show it so nobody noticed almost. Naruto was busy performing one of the many farces called missions with his team under the not-so-watchful eye of his Jonin instructor. Kakashi preferred to spend more time reading his adult novels rather than mess with the chores the villagers put forward, but he was by no means detached from reality. While he read his restricted book, his uncovered eye flicked back and forth between his charges. Sakura still hasn't made any real growth, He outlined everything in his mind before thinking about the specifics. She's got higher than average chakra control and a lot of book smarts, but that's about it. Still no adequate physical conditioning and nothing beyond academy techniques. Why don't they teach anything more useful than that worthless clone technique? No one uses it. He broke himself from that particular train of thought and stuck to the issues at hand. Sasuke is well, Sasuke. Real growth potential, but a serious lack of the concept of teamwork. If you asked me, he's a time bomb ready to go off at any time. He furrowed his eyes as he reached his final student. Naruto, he's got more gusto than anything else. He's got real potential, seeing as how he can pull off the shadow clone technique at such a young age. The only thing that worries me is teaching him anything that might accidentally break the seal on the fox. He shook his head at the notion. Nah, couldn't be that much of an issue. The fourth seal is top of the line. Still, something seems different about the boy. He's loud as hell, but when the others leave him alone he gets this weird look in his eye. As the perpetually tardy ninja pondered over the strange feeling his pupil exuded, Kurenai was acting on her suspicions a little more so. She had specifically requested fewer missions from the Hokage in order to accentuate her subordinates' training, seeing as how she didn't see doing jobs even civilians didn't care to perform as being worthwhile. The old man was hesitant, and she didn't really expect him to bow to her wishes based on a mere whim, but he surprised her, and did it anyway. The third must know something I don't, she concluded. He's quite adamant about Genin performing as many missions as they can as soon as possible. Could he be as suspicious as I am? She broke from her internal monologue and focused on her young team. She had laid a series of traps inside their training ground that could only be disabled through teamwork. The Genin had to have each other's backs at all times in order to pass through the course unscathed. So far, the results were predictable for the most part. Kiba was loud and boisterous, often the first one to break from the rule and fall into an ambush. Shino stuck close to his teammates and spoke up whenever he felt his input was needed, that is, to say, very little. Hinata filled in the gaps wherever the boys could not venture. But the Yuhi was beginning to notice minor tics in her female student. One such example was a near constant flinch in the shoulders as if she were about to raise her arms before deciding against it. As the Jonin watched the Hyuga closer, she would notice the girl's fingers and other extremities perform similarly as if about to pull something or start to reach for an object that was not there before halting. All that's nothing compared to this, though, she mused, glad that she designated the day for training rather than work. Watching the Byakugan user's eyes, she saw them glance back and forth ever so subtly. She knew that her bloodline was capable of locating most of her traps, but seeing as how the girl miraculously avoided those that were invisible to her advanced eyes, still managed to fall into a handful of ambushes. She saw those, I know she did. Waiting for her novice squad to complete the pitfall-laden exercise, she called the three over to discuss their performance. She congratulated the trio on a job well done before laying out their mistakes and successes. A knot formed in her stomach when she realized that the shy girl's errors, when listed, were most numerous amongst the Genin. Even Kiba managed to pull his smelly ass out of the fire. After the lecture, she convened for lunch and pulled the Hyuga to the side before she could wander off. When the others were out of earshot, she spoke. Hinata, she started as sympathetically as possible. I know you're trying hard, and nothing's more important than that, but is there something on your mind? What? The shy girl retorted, then peered down in defeat. And no, nothing. Hinata, you're very strong, you just don't know it yet. I noticed that you seemed more aware of your surroundings today, but you didn't act on them, that's all. Crap. Her mind shuffled around on itself. I was careless, thinking too much on that dead guy. Crap. She then looked up and forced a few tears into her eyes to water them up a bit. I am sorry. Nothing to be sorry about, the Yuhi responded while placing a gentle hand on the girl's head. Come on, I'll have lunch with you. Okay, she agreed quietly while groaning inwardly. She had been in a rush after her evening battle to get home and forgot to hand over the necklace to Shirori and Ikura so they could begin investigating it. I was hoping to do that during lunch. Looks like I'll have to wait. That night brought about extensive research on the behalf of both geniuses. For Naruto, it was interrogating his young prisoner. He had spent much of the previous evening building a cell for her and filling it to the brim with traps to ensure that she couldn't escape. He entered the separate room that he cut out of the stone overnight. The walls were bare uneven rock, and the only passable surface for a floor was a small flat slab in the center of the cramped prison. The insides of the bars, ceiling, and floor were lined with chakra-sensing seals. Any escape attempts utilizing the body's natural energy would instantly be quelled by the painful marks. If by happenstance the girl managed to circumvent the seals, automated puppets were hidden behind the walls, ready to react against any chakra source outside the cell. The Uzumaki donned his secondary clothing and cracked mask before entering. His flawless security system sensed his unique signature and ignored him as he approached the bars and slid a small cheap tin tray of cold food under a designated slot. There were no doors to the jail. He had drugged the girl to keep her unconscious long enough to build the prison around her. Shia, was it? He asked when the young girl stirred from her messy cot. She was almost incapable of movement, as her arms were bound tightly together behind her back from the shoulders down, and her legs were in manacles with a chain only long enough for her to shuffle her feet. I've got questions for you. Where am I? She inquired with beads of tears forming in the corners of her eyes. I'm asking the questions here. Depending on your answers, your stay here will be more pleasant. Do you understand? Why am I here? The waterworks were beginning to flow. Kerr said nothing as the little girl curled into a ball on her cot and began sniffling. If she's not faking this, she's got some serious problems. He stood there for a few minutes and, when Shia showed no signs of stopping anytime soon, reached through the bars and set down a large cup of water with a straw. She now had everything she needed to survive for a few days. He exited the hasty prison and began working on a new mask. This time he built a visage from the ground up rather than modifying a captured one. He began with a thin piece of wood that was carefully carved into the basic shape he wanted, that of kabuki mask with an open mouth. He figured as long as he could hide his unique birthmarks, revealing his mouth wouldn't be a problem. He was tired of going out of his way to avoid any techniques that would destroy his headwear. After a few hours of hammering on multiple layers of metal strips, he had achieved the desired look and integrity. Afterwards, he added mock teeth filled with poison gas around the mouth and painted the whole thing red so as to mask the mane of mock hair he wore to shield his own brilliant blonde hair from the world. He then added a layer of paper seals to the front, which he covered with an even thinner metal layer. The idea was to have a disposable outer visage that could conceal explosive tags and whatnot out in the open. It was brilliant in his opinion. Last but certainly not least were the mirrored glasses over the eye openings that hid his bright azure ocular lenses. When he completed his new mask, he put his ear to the prison chamber's entrance and heard the steady breathing of a sleeping Shia. He shrugged and ascended his vertical tunnel into his room to catch some sleep. He was dead tired. Hinata was having a busy night of her own. She had to endure listening to her father's inane drabble about duty, or something along those lines before she could sneak out to her secret lab. She decided to let Shiori and Ikura off the hook about researching the symbol on the jewelry of her undying enemy, and do it herself. Besides, she was looking forward to figuring it out on her own. She had spent the last few hours going through every text on seals she had compiled and nothing matched. How weird, she thought as she leaned back in her chair and took a swig of water. I'm pretty certain that it's a technique. It looked like Fumetsu was drawing this same mark on the ground. She turned her canteen up again and dove back into her encyclopedia. She shelved all the documents before her and pulled out a history book on a whim. Whenever she came upon a problem whose solution existed but was not obvious, she found that searching in off-handed places usually gave her a new idea of where to look. As she flipped through the old text, she thought about what else the mark could be as she stumbled across a brief history of clans in the Fire Country. She stared absent-mindedly at the book, and, sure enough, a revelation hit her. Family crests, maybe? She began running through all the registered genealogical symbols in the known world, and came up blank after an hour. That wasn't it. What else is there? What else? She wondered as she scanned her bookshelf, and her eyes strayed to a large scroll on religions. Religious symbol? She pulled the huge collection onto the floor and flipped it open. Inside was a complete accumulation of religious information along with their corresponding marks. After several minutes of scanning, she found what she was looking for, a circle with an embedded triangle. Jashin, she read aloud to no one, a belief in the deity known as Jashin whose principal commandment is indiscriminate slaughter. She skipped over the details of the gruesome prayers of its followers to the additional notes at the bottom. Those that follow this belief are known to be blessed with the ability to inflict harm done unto them upon others and immortality to all natural and unnatural death. Oh, son of a bitch. Takami was having a SOSO day. Her guitar was properly tuned, her glass bottle of whiskey was full and had friends, and she had recently obtained a pack of her favorite unfiltered cigarettes, a brand that was difficult to find as of late. While all these things were great, she had no news from her daughter. Ah, this sucks, she whined inwardly. Least you think that damn kid could do is right back. God damn it, I might not be the best mom around, but I'm her senior. Throw me a fucking bone here. Commander Takami, a dull voice stated from the end of her chamber. I'm here for further orders. Fumetsu, she replied while strumming her instrument, you ain't going anywhere for now. The Jashin follower cocked his head but otherwise did not betray his bewilderment. I'm sending in Duel's team. Teach 'em what you know. With all due respect, Commander, I believe. What the fuck are you doing? She interrupted with annoyance in her gruff voice. You disobeying me, undead fuckface? No, ma'am. Damn right. Dismissed. As Fumetsu turned to exit, she stated, you know, Shia didn't return from her patrol last night. The undying man nodded in affirmation. Duel's pretty pissed. It's all I can do to keep that freak from going vigilante on me. The immortal assassin shuddered ever so slightly under his loose, dull clothes. He knew full well that Takami's statement really meant that she threatened the masked man into submission. The female commander could easily kick any of her subordinates' asses, and he knew it. He said nothing as he removed himself from the smoke-choked room that reeked of hard liquor. Too bad too, she mentioned to the side as she strung a low chord. Little kid reminds of her when she was young. Course then she didn't stutter. The next evening, Naruto was mildly excited as he packed for his newest mission. Guess all that whining paid off, he murmured as he zipped up his bag and set it next to his door. Earlier in the day, after yet another chore of catching that damn cat, he raised hell in front of the Hokage about his dissatisfaction with the mundane work given to him. He didn't actually expect the old man to give in to his childish demand, but that mattered little now. He descended his hidden passage to his subterranean chamber to procure a few high-end weapons he had been saving for such an occasion when he spotted the door to the new dungeon he built. "Oh yeah, I got a prisoner now," he muttered under his breath as he thought about what to do with her. He could potentially be gone long enough for her to die of starvation. He sealed the last of the items and the tattoos on his back and donned his new mask while pulling out a large tin tray containing several dozen emergency rations. He then walked over to the tank of water he kept around and hoisted it over his shoulder before kicking the jail's chamber door open. "Rise and shine," he announced as he approached the steel-laden bars and set the food stores down. "How you feelin'?" She stirred from her cot. Her eyes were bloodshot, evidence that she had been crying hard for some time. "I am fine," she replied nervously. What is all that?" "Food and water," he said nonchalantly. "Now, I've got a mission starting tomorrow and I could be gone for a while. This," he tapped the metal box of rations with his foot, "should be enough for you to survive until then, assuming you don't scarf it all down in a day. Understand?" The young girl nodded as she slowly rose to her feet and uncomfortably shuffled over to the bars. "Why you're going to let me live?" she asked with a tinge of hope in her voice. "As long as you're useful," he responded with all seriousness. "First off, is she your real name or a code name?" It's my name." "How old are you?" "And 9. Geez, he thought, they're getting younger and younger. He kept his mind to the task at hand. So far she was cooperative, but who knew how long that would last? "Who are you working for?" She hesitated for a moment. "See Commander Takami." "Who's that?" "And my commander." "Guess you aren't worth it," he stated abruptly as he turned on his heel and began to leave. "Wait," she called, frightened that her fate had been sealed. What about tea, the food?" He turned back to her when he reached the door and said, "You're going in circles now. If you want to eat, you'll cooperate with me every step of the way." But I'm telling why you the tea truth. Tea, that is who I take orders from." "Does Commander Takami take orders from someone higher up?" "Why yes, but I don't." "Who?" "I don't know," she sniffled as tears began to well up again in her eyes. "I've never met him." Naruto's eyes narrowed behind his crimson visage. "So Takami's an intermediary? Interesting," he thought before continuing with the interrogation. "So this guy's orders are hers, right?" "See, correct," she replied, fighting back the waterworks when her captor's tone became somewhat lighter. "Do you know his name?" She shook her head. "I followed my brother around. He knows his name." "You ever see this guy? Heard of a nickname or something?" Her head shook again. "And no, I never came into much contact with everyone else at the main base." "Base? Where was that?" I don't know." Her eyes began to well up again when she realized that she couldn't answer the genius's questions. "I always stuck with my older brother." The Uzumaki sighed, then peered at her eyes and examined her general demeanor. "I don't think she's lying," he concluded after a tense minute. "She seems broken for some reason. Mental issues, I'm sure. Overdependence on her brother, maybe?" He nodded lightly and strode up to the bars before grabbing the large tin tray and dumping its contents on the other side. He then propped the good-sized barrel of water against the cage, pulled a hose from the inside via the hole in its center, and dropped the hollow rubber tube on top of the scattered rations. "Turn around," he ordered when he finished the task. What?" "Turn around," he repeated, "and lean against the bars." She obeyed with nervousness pouring off her, and she shivered with fright when she felt a new set of cold iron clamping over her wrists. She heard the clinging of metal on metal before the restraining bonds along her arms suddenly went slack and she could move said limbs. Pulling her arms over her head and bringing them back down again, she found the reason why. Her captor had removed the old constraints and replaced them with manacles with a chain that allowed for limited mobility. It was a step up from the previous arrangement. She turned around with surprise on her face. What's this?" "A reward," he answered simply before strolling to the chamber door. "You answered everything I wanted for now. Keep doing it, and things will be even more tolerable." With that, he closed the entrance off and the heavy locking bolts slid into place. "Thank you," she murmured as she handled the food pack and returned to her messy cot. At the Hokage Tower, Sarutobi was busy with paperwork as usual. He puffed on his pipe as he leaned back to give his bending spine a rest when he felt a presence enter the room. "Ah, Kakashi," he stated as he blew a pristine stream of smoke, "what brings you here?" "Pardon the intrusion, Lord Hokage," the copy ninja began, "but I'm here regarding the mission you assigned me and my team." "What about it?" He breathed in another mouthful from the burning tobacco. "Is there another reason you assigned it besides getting Naruto to shut up?" The old man's demeanor became serious as he understood what his subordinate was implying. "To a degree, yes. You told me that Naruto acts unusual whenever left alone?" "Yes, sir." "Do you think there is a possibility that he was responsible for that strange presence I felt a while ago?" "It is a possibility, but I can't say for certain. All I know is this: he seems more focused when no one else is bothering him, and he did learn how to perform the mass shadow clone technique all on his own. Considering his overall behavior, these small inconsistencies are extremely out of place." "And I agree," Sarutobi responded. "Naturally, you are to keep your team out of trouble should any arise, but in the case that it does, watch him carefully." "Ah," Kakashi stated as though he had forgotten something, "that's another thing." "What?" "About half the time I watch Naruto, he's aware of it." "Explain." "Whenever he's performing a chore, I watch him from afar. More often than not, though, he'll glance at me the moment my eye hits him." The Hokage sat back in his chair to take this new information in. "I see. Outside of that, he seems to stiffen up a little whenever I'm watching him from the shadows." "That is news." The old man thought for a moment. "All right, focus on Naruto during this upcoming mission and report back to me when you return." "Understood." Dismissed. When the copy shinobi departed from the room, Sarutobi stood from his chair and stood before the windows behind his desk. "Naruto," he muttered under his breath, "is there something you're not telling us, my boy?" The next day, after the simple chores assigned to Genin Team 8 were completed and the squad was dismissed, Shino approached his teacher with a concern weighing on his mind. "Teacher Kurenai," he addressed the woman. "HM? Shino, what is it?" she returned, surprised that the boy was still around. "I have been noticing that you seem to be watching Hinata a bit more closely than Kiba and I," he stated apathetically. "Is there a reason for you to do so?" She frowned inwardly. The bug user was incredibly intuitive. "I'm just keeping an eye on her. You know how fragile she can be at times." He nodded with silent understanding before speaking again. "When we passed your survival test, I planted a bug on each of you in case of an emergency." "You did what?" she said apprehensively. "I apologize for not asking your permission to do so, but my intentions were purely cautionary." She sighed. "Right, well, where are you going with this?" He continued with his flat tone. "The insect I planted on Hinata returned to me shortly after in a disoriented state. Upon examination, I determined that it had been exposed to a toxicant that is dangerous to my hive." "I see," the Yuhi raised an eyebrow, "and?" "There are only a handful of substances that are capable of affecting my bugs in such a manner, and all of them are closely guarded secrets, known only to my family and the Hokage. There is no viable reason that Hinata should know their chemical makeup." Kurenai nodded at the new information. "I see. Thank you for telling me, Shino. I'll be sure to keep that in mind. May I inquire as to why you are watching her so closely?" "I told you she's very timid and shy. I want to be sure she doesn't lose all confidence in herself." Shino nodded after a moment, a gesture that told the female jonin that he didn't believe her. Thankfully, he let it go and began towards his home. Phew, she thought, he's certainly a lot smarter than he lets on. Now to find this damn bug and squish it. Danzo, Hamura, and Kohara sat patiently in one of the many underground chambers of the root headquarters. The lights were quite dim, emanating from a handful of candles situated on a table at the center of the room. The trio of seasoned veterans was there in accordance with the request of their mutual associate. The elite guards of the supposedly dead organization stood at perfect attention outside the door, ushering the chamber in absolute silence. After several minutes, Hamura voiced his building annoyance. "How much longer are we going to be made to wait?" "Have patience," Kohara consoled, "he's never shown his face before. A few extra minutes is well worth the opportunity." As another handful of minutes ticked by, the three suddenly sensed a presence in one of the corners. All heads turned to the absolute shadows to behold the newcomer. "Gentlemen," a bored voice sounded from the darkness as its owner stepped into the muted light, "and Miss, welcome." "How did you get in here?" Danzo inquired. He knew for a fact that the only entrance was guarded by his top agents, and the hooded stranger emerged from a corner opposite the door. The man wore a dark gray cloak that hid all his features save his face. His expression was flat, and the hair that poked out from under the hood merged into a brown tangled mess. The only discernible weapon he carried was an elegant yet slightly rusted sword strapped to his side. The blade appeared foreign, as its design was straight, and it appeared thicker than most katana. "An arbitrary matter," the stranger replied. And you are? Koharu stated. I am a subordinate of your associate who wishes to be unnamed for the time being. You may call me Sten. Shiori and Ikura were out on patrol in the extensive hive hidden beneath Konoha per their creator's wishes. Hinata was busy maximizing her energy weapons efficiency and resiliency along with constructing some new weaponry that could be used against the Jashin follower. The reassembled Hyugas carefully made their way to the location of their mistress's previous battle in hopes of finding any evidence of the enemy's identities or affiliations. When they neared the scene, Ikura suddenly stopped and signaled the female freak to do the same. What's up? Shiori inquired when she saw her companion's camera eye flexing and refocusing. Company, he replied, his nervous facial twitch accompanying his voice. 3 heat signatures. Got it, she said as she knelt forward while simultaneously activating the multi-purpose device strapped to her back. The boxy machine had a wonderful variety of functions ranging from surveillance purposes to a massive self-destruct if need be. She reached back and unhooked a tube from a protruding disc, then plugged it into the port behind her ear. The circular piece of metal then began to flux while reading the reverberations from the tunnel, and eventually bringing the stranger's conversation in loud and clear inside her oral cavity. She hit the record button on the large machine, then listened intently. Who threw these? One of the men's voices rang in her inner ear. They don't look like needles. I don't think they are, another ninja answered. See the smoke residue? I think this is shrapnel from a bomb. Then how the hell did we not hear it? The first shinobi returned. Don't know, but judging from all the burns it looks like there were quite a few of them. Hey, the third man interrupted, check this out. A shuffling of feet filled the airwaves before he spoke again. It looks like another set of footprints. What kind of sandals are those? The first man asked. If they're sandals at all, they're not from around here. Think this other person was with them? The second ninja thought out loud. I doubt it, the third guy clarified. I think they were combatants as well. How do you figure? Our comrades' bodies had post-mortem burns and lacerations. Some kind of fighting went on after they were killed. Gotcha. An awkward silence settled in. Let's report this to Danzo. He'll be interested in this. Shiori cut the recording short and shut the device down with an explosive smile on her face. We got a name, she whispered excitedly to Ikuru. Let's take this back to the mistress. The reassembled Hyuga male nodded in agreement, and the freakish duo took off towards their headquarters. Naruto was having a great time with his new mission. As he laid his head to his pillow that night, he did a quick recap of the day and his soul leapt for joy. It turned out that the man he and his team was tasked to protect, Tazuna, had lied about the severity of his situation. He had applied for protection against mere bandits and run-of-the-mill thieves, but in actuality was being pursued by a wealthy crooked businessman and a band of powerful missing ninjas. The Uzumaki was slightly disappointed when Kakashi caught the shinobi that dug his toxic claws into the blonde's hand before the closet genius could counter the enemy. The boy considered such an attack his specialty. Let an opponent get close enough to injure him and believe he had the upper hand, then strike him down with no hope of recovery. Naruto honestly didn't think about the enemy's weapon being poisoned, but it was inconsequential to him. He had an antidote for that particular contaminant in one of his seals. He was mildly pissed off by Sasuke's childish taunt, although he tried not to let it get to him. The hell does he know? He reasoned as he tried to sleep and failed. Not every strategy involves flashy moves. As he urged himself away from his inward ranting, he found that he was quite excited by the notion that the sword-wielding ninja, Zabuza, was still alive and had an acquaintance talented enough to fool his own teacher, albeit temporarily. When he lied still for a while longer, his body became no less tired. He listened carefully for his Uchiha teammate's steady breathing to be sure he was asleep. When he confirmed it, he silently leapt out the window and made his way into the nearby forest. Here goes nothin', he muttered as he put his hands together in the appropriate seals and brought a dozen copies of himself to life. He nodded to the shadow clones and they, fully understanding his intentions, transformed their appearances into that of his alter ego. Alright guys, he stated quietly as the clones paid close attention. Zabuza's out of commission for about a week at most, so he's probably got a place to recuperate. He's also probably got friends other than those demon brothers. Find him, or his flunkies, and kill them. If you have the time, look for any evidence of Gato's location. Got it? When the identical masked copies nodded, he dismissed them and headed back to his room. As he climbed into his comforter, he wondered how his skills would hold up against any of the missing ninja's subordinates. He knew that the clones couldn't take much of a hit, but whenever one died, all its memories, information, and experience came back to him. It was an invaluable trait that would serve him well. He finally felt at peace with his adrenaline and began to fall asleep with a tingling feeling as his chakra continued to keep the dozen copies alive. The next few days brought on huge waves of excitement for Hinata. When her subordinates returned with a conversation giving a name, she was ecstatic, utterly overjoyed. As the days ticked on, she put her exploration of the tunnels on hold while she set up monitoring equipment on a record level for her. She didn't know the exact location of the root headquarters at first, so she bugged damn near every inch of the Hokage tower until she could obtain some leads. Her work was beginning to pay off, since by now she had noticed some discrepancies in the arrival and departure of several individuals, Danzo included. She saw that the old war hawk and several mysterious masked men that didn't seem to be NBU members disappear completely in a certain area within the structure, so she was narrowing her search down with excellent results. She arrived at her hidden chamber after the day's missions with her squad, followed by the setup and relocation of equipment around her quarry. The moment the door was sealed behind her, she crashed onto the old couch she kept around whenever she felt the need to relax for a moment. As she let her mind ease into complacency, she thought about simpler things. Shiori and Ikaro let me know when they see Danzo or those rude guys, so I should take it easy for now. I kinda wish I could monitor the tunnels like I am the tower, but I don't have nearly enough equipment to do something like that on such a grand scale. She agonized mentally for a moment that she couldn't be in 1,000 places at once, then promptly let it go. On another note, what should I do about Kurenai? I can see the suspicion in her eyes, but I can't become an honest-to-God klutz. I'm already doing the best I can. Oh, what to do, what to do? Ah, mistress. Ikaru's voice called from his monitoring station. You might want to see this. The blue-haired genius leapt to her feet and was standing behind the reassembled Hyuga in less than a second, brimming with anticipation. She followed the man's outstretched arm to a monitor displaying a feed from one of the many hidden cameras within the Hokage building and furrowed her brow with mild concern. Who's that? She asked aloud, even though she knew no answer could be provided. She stared at two individuals discussing something on screen. One was the familiar form of Danzo while the other was extremely out of place by any standards. Through the graininess of the screen, she could somewhat make out the mystery man's demeanor. The unusual man wore a simple light blue business suit and dark violet tie. He carried a briefcase, something only a civilian would do, and wore dark polished shoes. She squinted and determined that he appeared to be middle-aged with a short crew cut and a prominent forehead. She cocked her head at the strange appearance when the man suddenly turned his head and peered straight into the camera. He sees it! She yelped. Disable it! Cut off the connection! As the startled Ikaru moved at lightning speed to shut off the camera and render any traces back to the lab impossible, the screen suddenly changed into an up-close broadcast of the stranger. For the split second that his face was clear, Hinata noticed that a pair of dull blue-green eyes accompanied the apathy in his aging features. The monitor faded to black as the connection was finally cut. The young Hyuga genius let out a breath she didn't know she held and released her panicked iron grip from the table. She took several deep breaths to calm herself, and issued a string of commands to her assembled underlings. Ikaru, Shiori, drop what you're doing and run a full surveillance system diagnostic. If you see anything that's not ours, cut it off. Full permission is granted. No one must find out we're here. Yes, mistress. Both subordinates responded as they carried out their creator's orders as quickly as they could. I'm going back home in case the shit hits the fan, she continued as she slipped into her shy girl clothes and made for the door. If anyone other than me comes in, activate the master self-destruct and get yourselves to the safe house. She sprinted to a standalone console that had obvious importance and entered a series of codes before unlocking a blaring red switch cover, revealing the ominous crimson button that would assuredly burn anything in her secret chamber. And make sure you guys are safe, alright? She added with subdued softness. Yes, mistress. They affirmed simultaneously with wide eyes, their attention going everywhere at once. They noted that the young girl exited the lab and continued their checkup unimpeded for the remainder of the evening. Naruto was getting a headache towards the end of the week. He had been training non-stop with Sasuke on the tree climbing exercise. Gah, why do I have to waste time doing this? He whined mentally before the logical part of his brain reminded him. Oh right, I'm supposed to be an idiot. Besides, if I disappeared with my clones, things would look bad for me. Other than that, I don't think Kakashi would teach us anything new even if we aced this little trial. As the blonde ran up the tree for the millionth time and purposely botched his control, his newest batch of clones was steadily closing in on what he believed to be Zabuza's hideout. For the past week, the shadow clones had been searching diligently, eliminating large areas in their search for the missing ninja and his crew. The genius knew time was running out, and this thought dominated the minds of his copies, thus causing them to continue their renewed exploration with extreme vigor. When the Uzumaki aimed for the scarred tree for the millionth and one time, he brought his foot down and was suddenly aware of an intruding presence. He glanced to the side and saw a hooded figure looming in an intensely dark shadow. Screw this, he thought as he moved his arm to unseal his ninjato when he was halted by the sound of the Uchiha's voice. Hey loser, the brooding boy droned, what are you doing? What? He returned as he spun on his heel before glancing back. When he saw that the stranger was no longer there, he completed his movement by scratching the back of his head and laughing. I was just thinking how frustrating this tree climbing thing is. Weirdo, Sasuke muttered before resuming his training. Who was that? Naruto wondered, ignoring the prick's comment. More importantly, where did he go? In a room unknown to any of the natives of Konoha, for silhouettes dwelled in its deep arcing shadows. Any news on our new guests? Yes, sir, the hooded man replied. Naruto Uzumaki is operating separately from an assigned mission in the Land of Waves. He seems to be searching for the missing ninja known as Zabuza Momochi. I see. And you? I believe the other individual to be a Hinata Hyuga, the stranger in the business suit explained with a slow, raspy voice that paused at awkward intervals. She seems to possess a rather extensive knowledge of technology. Good. Let's keep this from our mutual associates, shall we? The other three in the room acknowledged the order in their own way before exiting in their separate unique departures. We've got company, a ninja with an aging headband emblazoned with the symbol of the Hidden Mist Village announced into his shortwave radio. Hideaki was left in charge when Zabuza and the child, Haku, departed no more than half an hour ago. He had not anticipated any trouble, but these were unsure times. I count 3 in Sector 8C over. Another 3 in Sector 10A, Kaido's voice crackled over the tiny device. I got 3 more in Section 5D, Osamu reported last. Looks like they're headed for the hideout, the temporary head concluded. Each of the identical attackers were in areas directly north of their secluded base of operations, and the masked men's routes would bring them right to the rogue shinobi's doorstep. He touched his finger to the radio sender and issued a command. Head back for the base and reinforce the perimeter. We're outnumbered and need to set up an ambush. Come on, Osamu whined, we can take M. They're shrimps. Shut up and follow orders for once. Fall back now. Hideaki exited his cover as quietly as he could and rushed back to the elaborate hut within a minute. There wasn't much time to set up traps, but there was already a perimeter of tripwires, explosive tags, and prime kunai launchers. If the 9 intruders could pass by all that unscathed, then the runaway mist ninjas were in serious trouble. Kaito and Osamu arrived seconds later and took up defensive positions to lie in wait. A handful of 10 seconds passed, the ensuing silence deafening. The calm forest suddenly rumbled to life and the ground shook as an exploding mark was activated, scorching a small crater into the earth. The sound of swift footsteps was heard cascading from the conflagration before they were cut off by more explosions and the discernible noise of poison knives flying through the air and impacting soft targets. Well, hell, the leader thought, maybe we don't have to do any fighting at all. His eyes suddenly went wide when his loud subordinate decided he was invincible and stood from his cover. Yeah! Osamu yelled as he brandished his short sword above his head, we got him. The husky man was interrupted by a large shuriken that burst through the dense smoke and struck him in the leg. He cursed as loud as his lungs could exhale as he doubled over in pain and attempted to extract the large blade from his tibia bone when the weapon suddenly glowed with a dozen sparks from explosive tags. Before the man could push his arm forward to free the massive throwing star, the metal exploded in a brilliant flash and showered the kill zone with lumps of charcoaled flesh and bone. Shit! Kaito reeled around to glance at the smokescreen formed by the perimeter's triggered defenses. Were those all decoys? Idiot! Get down! The startled underling failed to obey before a volley of shuriken penetrated the choked battlefield and forced him to maneuver around them, batting any away that came dangerously near his flesh. After a heart-pounding 5 seconds, the barrage wasn't letting up and both men were beginning to worry. As the smoke settled, they instantly saw why. Up in the trees sat 6 identical crimson-masked men, all flinging every manner of throwing weapons from unseen holsters on their upper arms. Hideaki grinned when he saw them kneeling precariously on the limbs of a single tree and began to run his hands through a series of seals. Upon completion, he planted them to the ground and a surge of chakra snaked through the loose soil and found their way into the roots of the targeted timber. Said tree then appeared to melt as all its sap oozed out in a torrent and hardened to the intensity of steel due to the infused energy. None of the intruders could leap away in time and were caught by the impossibly sticky substance as the missing mist shinobi reeled back then blew a jet of searing flames at them. He smirked when he saw the bodies catch fire and boil away to nothing in a heartbeat before averting his gaze for the other 3 enemies. He heard several pops emanating from the burnt limbs, and his eyes glanced back to find the opponents had disappeared into wisps of smoke. Shadow clones? He realized with shock. No bodies were left in the hardened sap, so the real body was still around somewhere. His head shot back and forth in a rising panic to find the remaining opponents. Kaito! He ordered, fall back. Hold them off in the base. The man nodded and dashed from his cover towards the nearest entrance. From the corner of his eye, he noticed the remaining 3 opponents circling around to the opposite side of the hideout, and he turned to inform his temporary leader. Captain? He shouted, there over his voice suddenly cut out as a straight blade adorned by an illustrated dance of runes pierced his throat. He fell to his knees as his body became heavy and his vocal cords gurgled when they became flooded with blood and his consciousness slipped into darkness for the final time. Hideaki witnessed the entire scene with surprise. He had also noticed the remaining enemies moving along the long way and was on the verge of scolding his subordinate for unnecessary speaking when a pair of the identical masked intruders shot out of the ground and killed Kaido. As soon as the underling's warm corpse crashed against the forest floor, one of the men launched the other across the rogue ninja's path, and the sole survivor found himself face to face with a familiar weapon. That's the Demon Brothers' gauntlet," he stated loudly when his eyes locked onto the ring chain that connected the masked pair. He moved his arms down to pull free his custom daggers when the opponents moved with speed that could rival a hurricane. The next instant found the appointed head bound tightly by the bladed chain, ready to be ripped to shreds at the drop of a hat. "You the leader here? Why are there more of you?" He struggled to speak against the lethal binds. "How did you do that?" He received no verbal answer in reply, but the intruder closest to him pointed up, so he peered up as far as he could without severing an artery. "Holy shit," he swore in amazement as a sixth masked man shimmered into view from nothing on top of the highest tree. "An Overwatch. You got anything on Gado?" The same enemy inquired as he tugged lightly on his heavy claw, cutting the blades ever so slightly into the defeated man's flesh. Hideaki coughed as his air was restricted, and he could feel warm blood trickling into the open air. "Why yeah, he's got a dock just south of the Wave Country's bridge where he runs a lot of drugs and stuff." He was about to spill everything he knew when he spotted a pile of logs that was used for firewood several meters away. He began utilizing his chakra in preparation for a body switch, only to have his captors beat him to it and yank back on their chain gauntlets, slicing him to chunks before he could do anything. "Anyone else in there?" one of the clones shouted at the building to the trio that entered while the recently deceased man was apprehended. "Nope," another copy answered. "This place is pretty bare. Nothing of any value in here." "All right, disperse." The 6 clones puffed out of existence, transferring all their knowledge to the original. Naruto stopped in his tracks as his copy's information was sent back to his mind. He was initially worried when half of his force was wiped away in one fell swoop, but there was nothing left to worry about anymore. Zabaz's hideout was effectively reduced to zilch. He was rushing to the bridge to intercept said ninja at the moment. Not 5 minutes ago, he had dispatched the subpar swordsman sent to deal with Tazuna's daughter and grandson. Now that he was aware of one of the crooked businessman's bases of operation, he knew that he had another excellent opportunity to nip things in the bud. He continued his dead run until he reached the shore. When the bridge came into view, he leapt down to the water and ran his hands through some seals for a technique that he was looking to using. His fingers completed the proper motions and 20 water clones bearing his alter ego's image rose up from the sea. "All right," he addressed the small army, "you know where to strike. Take out Gado's dock and anyone who resists. Understood?" He received 20 masked heads nodding in unison. "Good. Dismissed." As the clones charged down the shoreline to put distance between themselves and the bridge, the blonde himself continued toward the partially constructed bridge. As he neared, he noticed that Kakashi was occupied with Sabuza, Sakura was standing around doing nothing, and Sasuke was standing between floating slabs of ice. "Oh, I gotta see this," he mused playfully as he charged for the bloodline technique. While the original prodigy engaged the ice user, Naruto's water clones ran hellbent across the deep water to the south in search of the criminal harbor. The copies were born from the imitation of the Momochi's aquatic clone, and thus were slightly more durable than shadow clones due to the larger amounts of chakra required. After a solid 10 minutes of searching, small shacks and ramshackle buildings began to emerge from the foliage opposite the wave's shoreline. Sure enough, there were decent-sized docks with several boats of varying bulk. Most were small 2-person fishing boats, but there was one larger boat and an even larger barge, both of which were pulling away from the harbor. "Which should we take?" one clone whispered to another as it noticed the vessels splitting up and sailing separate directions. Each sea-bound craft was loaded down with armed men, mercenaries hired by the wealthy Gado. "See all those guards?" the other copy answered as it nodded towards the rounds of weapon-bearing men on casual patrols around the shoddy structures. "They probably get paid well." "And there's a lot of them," a third water clone added. "Where's that barge going?" another Naruto asked, shifted his gaze between the 2 boats. "Looks like towards the town. Probably to circle around and meet up with those other guys." "Well, I think the original can handle at least 1 boatload. And we don't know if that barge is really flanking anyone, it could be for the village." "All right," the leading clone silenced the hushed discussions. 5 of you go for the barge and the rest hit the docks. Got it?" 19 heads nodded. "Good. Go." With that, 20 identical masked geniuses set their attacks in motion. By the time the multiple Uzumakis agreed on a plan, the barge was rounding the shoreline further south. The 5 clones tasked with sinking the vessel gave chase and, upon nearing it, dispersed into the water and nearby foliage behind the sandy beach. The 2 prodigies underneath the waves swam for the hull and latched on while unsealing their custom ninjatos, the seals on the long straight swords capable of wreaking havoc on the basic elements of the metal surface. Two of the three Narutos traveling through the trees leapt from the outstretched branches and landed on the crowded deck, steel spears swinging. The pair of water clones was immediately surrounded as they wildly thrust and parried the various weapons of the ill-trained mercenaries, inflicting nothing more serious than mere broken bones and deep lacerations. As the dual-masked men created chaos on the deck and promptly attracted the attention of every man on board, the third clone in hiding on the shore charged out onto the water surface and smiled when it saw the thugs armed with crossbows taking aim inwardly. It ran its hands through a series of seals that were, once again, copied from Zabuza himself. If he wasn't an enemy, it thought, I'd shake his hand and thank him. He completed the appropriate movements, and chakra channeled into the water at his feet. The salty liquid began to churn violently and, within a heartbeat, became a raging, rotating torrent that was focused against the barge. The water explosion technique, wasn't it? The doomed ship was impacted head-on by the massive surge of spinning water, and the deck was rocked fiercely as its inhabitants either clung to the railings for dear life or flew to a watery grave. When the technique ran its course, the vessel was dangerously waterlogged but miraculously afloat. The mercenaries glanced around to find the masked men with the spears standing a good distance away and began frantically bailing the water out. Underneath the flooded barge, the clones glanced at each other, nodded, and then plunged their swords into the hull, penetrating the metal like butter. The seals glowed with extreme intensity as they broke down the elements of the steel into easily destructible materials, and the sea-bound copies anchored their feet to the hull with chakra and ran the length of the ship, slicing out portions that sealed the craft's fate. They released themselves and broke through the surface to watch as the barge succumbed to the sea. The vast majority of the mercenaries clawed at the water as their heavy armor and weaponry weighed them down. And any of them who were capable of staying afloat were eventually sucked beneath the choppy waves as the sinking ship pulled them under its self-induced current. Looks like our work's done here, the clone that initiated the stolen technique stated before melting into the water and rejoining the sea, immediately followed by its comrades. Gato's drug-running harbor fared no better. The guards were fairly lax when the docks and nearby shacks suddenly burst into flame. When droves of henchmen dashed towards the conflagration to put out the fires and save as much merchandise as they could, knives and huge shuriken with attached paper tags flew from the adjacent forest, embedded themselves into the rundown structures, and exploded with unrelenting fury, consuming every man near the water. The hired gangs then rushed to the scene to locate the intruders and were systematically mowed down by kunai being flung from underneath the water's surface. Seeing that their defenses were easily overrun, the remaining guards retreated into the large warehouse located the farthest inland where the spreading fire would not reach. They hunkered down in the cramped confines of the maze of equipment and crates, awaiting anyone to waltz through the singular door. Lo and behold, their nervous patience paid off when a lone ninja strode in with a waving crimson mane, blood-red mask, and an easy 10 pounds of knives and shuriken tied off with exploding tags strapped to him. The non-shinobi immediately assumed this one man to be the sole source of their misfortune. The water clone, however, knew different. His assignment was nothing more than intimidation. These men were not trained in the ninja arts. To them, a shinobi was an individual of legend, a fighting force superior to all others. "You Gato's men?" the Uzumaki copy inquired nonchalantly. Murmurs began to echo between the hired hands and the door behind Curse slammed shut and steel bolts slid into place. The shuffling of feet and poorly worded taunts filled the air as the mercenaries circled the genius. As soon as most of the men wormed out of the woodwork, the clone spoke up again. "I'll take that as a yes." He released his ninjato and fell into a deep stance, the steel strips screwed to the bottom of his wooden sandals clanging against the floor. Four swordsmen charged him from all directions. The water-based copy lurched forward and lobbed a barrage of shuriken into the thug directly to his right, then slashed his sword across his own body, forcing the other three to reel back. The first man to dodge leaned forward when Curse's weapon was clear of him and began to bring his own sword down. But he was stopped and thrown to the ground by a powerful back kick, the force of the metal-top sandal breaking his nose and caving in his eyes. He fell backwards, head first, to the floor and clutched at his eyes while wailing in agony when a sudden needle to the throat ended his misery. The Naruto clone pulled himself up from the fresh body, retracting the needle as he rose, and tossed the bloody sliver into the eye of the swordsman behind him. The mercenary stopped as he dropped his weapon and clawed at his face, and the crimson-masked genius swung his straight blade upwards, cleaving the enemy's head in two lengthwise. In the same motion, the clone brought his blade down on the final thug and killed him similarly. All this happened in the span of 2.5 seconds, too slow for the prodigy's standards but necessary to set an example for the remaining hired hands. Said gang members eyed each other nervously and came to a general consensus: charge in a bum rush. Surely the lone ninja couldn't handle all of them at once. But the moment they reached striking distance, the man melted into seawater and the walls on all sides exploded to reveal 14 more identical masked men, all armed to the teeth. The split second that it took the mercenaries to register the newcomers was enough to give birth to doubt in their minds, but not enough time to repent for their choice of actions. The clones unleashed a solid wall of iron, steel, and paper against the stupefied enemies before leaping away. The moment afterward, the warehouse was engulfed in a fantastic display of fire and heat. The copies landed in the nearby trees and scanned the destruction. The docks and their subsequent structures were either damaged beyond repair or razed to the ground. The multiple curses nodded in understanding of their mission's completion and reverted back to their liquid form. Naruto was on the verge of killing Haku, the boy whose bloodline allowed him to manipulate ice, when he felt a tinge in the back of his mind. All the memories of his water clones were coming back to him, and he fought to hold back a grin. Wow, they did really well, he mused. I ought to use them more often. He mentally shook the thoughts from his head to focus on the battle before him. He was, thankfully, able to refrain from utilizing any techniques that would shatter his projected persona, but his quest to remain anonymous in the world of geniuses caused him some serious injuries that could only be tended to by the demon fox. Other than that, he was in the clear. The blonde recognized his enemy from the previous days and didn't feel any real urge to end his life, especially after hearing what he had to say. Haku, unlike a ninja, was overly kind and didn't have an ounce of bloodlust in his body. Even so, he was willing to forsake his own beliefs in order to receive the one thing he truly desired, being needed by someone. Hell, if I knew that, I would have hired him myself, Naruto thought, but despite all that, we're enemies. I've got to do it, he charged and stifled a sigh of relief when the ice user stopped him and dashed to save Zabuza from Kakashi's attack. The undercover genius watched the entire scene unfold and added his 2 cents when Haku died before the former mist ninja. He recognized the boatload of mercenaries as the hired thugs piled up on the end of the incomplete bridge and passively observed the Momochi taking Gato's life in a final act of revenge. When the enemy was mortally wounded and uttered his dying words, the blonde prodigy released tears that his false persona would shed but felt something akin to sympathy and respect for the deceased. Misguided, yes, he concluded as he sniffled, but fine shinobi nonetheless. The sun rose into the sky to announce another day in the ninja village, much to Hinata's dismay. She had pulled yet another all-nighter the previous evening, straining herself in her search for information on the strange suit-clad man who detected her camera. How can there be nothing on this guy? She wondered as she took an out-of-the-way route to rendezvous with her novice squad. Seriously, there's a vacuum of data on him. No one except Danzo even knew the guy was there, and he sure as hell didn't look like a shinobi. What does that mean? Lost in her thoughts, she forgot that she wasn't in the catacombs beneath her feet and walked with her arms folded behind her head while her hands cradled the back of her skull. She let loose a yawn produced from 48 hours of hard-working sleeplessness, not worried that anyone saw her. The alley she was strolling down was deserted anyway, or at least as far as her weary mind could tell. Kurenai hid in the shadows watching her student, relying on her full arsenal of stealth techniques to ensure that her blue-haired pupil wouldn't detect her. She only hoped that the girl didn't activate her bloodline and render all her efforts in vain. As she spied on her student, she was shocked to find her behaving uncouthly. What's this? Hinata Hyuga stretching and yawning in broad daylight? When did she pick this up? As she continued to tail the girl, she witnessed the prim and proper heiress perform unfamiliar acts such as lazily glancing around with glazed-over lavender eyes, scratching herself wherever she felt an itch, and even picking her nose once before flinging the findings away. They're all small things, but she's never done any of this before. What happened to her? The Yuhi followed the undercover genius for a while longer until she ran out of alleyways in which to reside, deciding to take one last look at her charge before rushing off to the meeting point. She felt the impulse for her jaw to drop and resisted when the Hyuga emerged from the final alley into a populated street, and became shy and withdrawn again. Alright, something's up. This isn't right. Hinata's acting un-Hinata-like when no one's around. Now how should I look into this? She blinked a few times and realized that moment was not an appropriate time for such musings. I'll figure it out later. If I'm late, she'll suspect something. She broke her overlapping techniques and took a swift route to the rendezvous location. As Genin Team 7 made their way back to Konoha, Naruto was busy plotting his next course of action as curse. I should look into medical techniques, he pondered, having ordered a trio of clones to dig up Haku's body, drain all the remaining blood into a sterile container, and rebury the corpse the evening the ice user was housed in his final resting place. Course, that stuff's not my strong point. As much as I hate to admit it, I'll bet silence could pull a secret or two out of that bloodline as things stand right now. He accidentally cracked a humble grin at the thought of his intelligent rival, but caught himself in time to make his mouth explode into a smile and enthusiastically asked Sakura out on a date, which she thankfully refused. In accordance with his well-known mask, he whined about her choice when Sasuke muttered his 2 cents and got the blonde engaged in another mental rant against the Uchiha. That arrogant son of a bitch, he thought, barely checking the urge to knock the so-called genius flat on his ass. Ever since he activated his Sharingan, he's been more of an asshole than ever. He would have planned on acting on his dislike for the boy, except doing so could potentially jeopardize his cover. He had never seen the withdrawn preteen in a truly private place during the late evening hours, the only times the Uzumaki would even think to consider venturing outdoors. Ah well, let him have his fun for a while. It sure as hell won't last. The gates of his home village came into view above the tree line, and he entered what he affectionately referred to as mechanical mode, the mind-numbingly monotonous pattern of being a blonde, loud-mouthed fool for the sake of the city's peace of mind. He went through the motions, reported with his team to the Hokage, ate lunch at Ichiraku's while bragging about how awesome he was to IM, trained for a few hours until dusk, and then headed home. Of course, the day was only beginning when he stepped foot inside his crappy apartment. He immediately battened down the hatches, checking all his traps and alarms to be sure they held up during his absence, and making sure not a soul was watching before he descended the hidden vertical passage. He entered his secret chamber, and was pleased to find it as he left it. He strolled over to the small metal dump built into the farthest corner of the spacey room and gathered up a few panels of tin and iron. Casting a small fire-based technique, he heated the metal sheet's edges and promptly made a box with a simple hinged lid. As he unsealed the container with Haku's blood from one of the seals in his back, he performed a basic ice move to significantly cool down the new makeshift refrigerator before placing the plasma samples inside and locking it shut. I've got to prepare some seals to keep this thing cold. Well, that or build a generator. He pondered the minor quandary for a moment, and decided the generator would be more suitable for the task. He returned to the miniature scrapyard and began picking through the random pieces of metal when a steel door caught the corner of his eye. His head turned to gaze at the secure passage, and he remembered what it was for. Oh yeah, I've got a prisoner now. I wonder if she's still alive? The blonde genius strode up to the heavy door while donning his mask and unlocked the numerous bolts before swinging the hunk of steel inward. You alive in there? He called with a casual underlying tone. Ah. A pair of brown eyes shot over to him with a deer in the headlights look. See curse. You'll be back. I'll take that as a yes. He strolled up to the gates and glared down at her as she sat cross-legged on the rough stone floor. Looks like you went through all those rations. She said nothing, peering down as if ashamed. Her behavior really reminded him of the chronically shy Hyuga, Hinata. I thought up some more questions while I was away. Now you're gonna answer 'em, right? Catching the slight nod of her head, he continued. Were you ever contracted by a man named Gato? Who? She looked up with genuine puzzlement across her stained features. Strike that from the list. He decided to give her his reasoning. He's a businessman who hires rogue ninjas. What I really want to know is if you are a missing ninja. She returned a blank gaze at him before shaking her head with uncertainty. I don't think so. Commander Takami W wouldn't take orders F from someone W weaker than her. Curse's eyebrow raised behind the mirrored lenses of his red visage. Someone stronger than your commander? Shia nodded. Let me guess. The same person giving her orders is also the same guy you've never seen or heard of before. Her head hung in defeat. Why yes. The undercover genius sighed. Alright then. What's your commander like? Well, she's very crude, but she's very nice to me. How about techniques, weaknesses, personality quirks? She stumbled against the rapid-fire interrogation. I've never seen her in sea combat, but she does like to drink and smoke a lot. That it? She swears a lot too. My god, Naruto mentally laid his head in his hand. She's obedient, but she doesn't know squat. Wait, she could have had interrogation training. Could I be asking the wrong questions? Could she be fooling me entirely? He eyed her while he mused internally and decided to test her. He leaned towards the bars and slammed a palm against the metal rods. Quit fucking around. He shouted angrily, don't waste my damn time. If you're not gonna be useful, I may as well walk out that door and never come back. The young girl reeled back in fright when he began yelling, and tears welled up in her brown eyes. But I am not lying. She pleaded with a particularly nasty stutter. She tried to stand and approach the bars but fell over due to the short chains around her legs. I am not lying. She bawled, the waterworks beginning to flow at full capacity. The Uzumaki wondered if she really was clueless. If she was, then who in their right mind would employ an underling that was so fragile? Then why can't you answer half my questions? He toned his voice down. I've gotten very little useful information out of you so far. Why is that? She choked as her tears impeded speech and sputtered. I am just a FF front line SSS soldier. I am not told anything you outside my missions. She continued to weep heavily on the ground. Ah damn, the blonde sighed. His instincts told him that she was honest to God ignorant of the important issues behind her leader's command structure. His conscience was also tugging at him for placing her in such a panicked state for a fruitless reason. Come here, he ordered calmly as he knelt down. What? She sniffled as she fought hard to stifle the tears. Come over here, he repeated. Why? She continued, fear lining her voice. What are you going to do to me? Just come here, he said calmly. Have I actually hurt you yet? Shia hesitated for a few moments as she attempted to calm herself and slowly brought herself to her feet. She shuffled over to her captor with resigned apprehension in her features and winced when he made a sudden movement when she approached him. Feeling the flesh on her ankle suddenly breathing again, she cracked her eyes open and peered down. What are you doing? Kerr said nothing as he pulled the shackles off her feet and tossed them outside the prison against the uneven rock wall. Reward, he stated simply as he rose and glanced down to meet her gaze. If your commander's nice to you, then I might have a use for you yet. He backed off a few feet then turned on his heel to make for the heavy steel door. I'll feed you later, he informed her as he proceeded to shut the heavy entrance and lock it. Before the door closed, the imprisoned girl collected herself as best she could and yelled, Thank you. Naruto reinstated the final lock and turned back to stare at his metal dump. What the hell am I doing? He muttered before continuing his current project of building a small generator. Hinata leaned back in her chair and let a profound yawn loose from her soft lips. She had been at this new endeavor for a week straight, and only now was it beginning to show any results. She decided after her brief encounter with the stranger in the blue suit that she needed some new weaponry in her arsenal. She had determined that her next armaments would need to be highly explosive yet numerous, seeing as how she had a Jashin follower running loose in the underground hive in which she resided. Her first choice was to construct small fragile marbles that contained a highly unstable chemical substance that would explode if jarred, but that turned out to be too unpredictable for her tastes. She then tried injecting the volatile liquid into hollowed-out needles, but the explosive yield was too pitiful for combat. Her final solution was to strip away an outermost casing from the needles, wrap exploding tags around them, then replace the sheared metal back over the slips of lethal paper for a shrapnel effect. She tested the first few prototypes with large degrees of success, but the actual process of merging the shinobi tools was insanely time-consuming. After constructing a laughably small amount of the explosive slivers by hand in a few days' time, she built a simple machine that could do it automatically. However, she had to reduce the device's speed in order to exponentially reduce the number of errors it made. While her machinations were doing better than her, it wasn't by much, so she built a dozen of the accursed machines to accomplish the job. But now that production of the supercharged projectiles was in full swing, she could concentrate on their delivery system. She had a handful of ideas ranging from upgrading her current equipment to creating new devices from the get-go. She took a seat at her desk and began working out a few schematics when she glanced over to find her concentrated energy weapon laying peacefully in its holster, ready for combat. I don't know if that damn thing's brilliant or a piece of crap, she wondered. No matter how many times I improve it, the insides still melt after 2 or 3 shots. It's so unreliable. And the power consumption. I'll bet if I hooked that thing up to the Konoha power grid I could cause a blackout. She chuckled at the last thought, and filed it under the for a rainy day experiments. She continued working vigorously until she came up with 2 plans involving her new needles that she found the most feasible. Quickly scribbling down the math involved, she stood and made her way to her main workstation and began assembling the required parts. This is gonna be great, she quietly exclaimed to herself with an unavoidable sense of victory rising in her stomach. Fumetsu! A patrolman yelled as the undying man entered the chamber that reeked of cigarettes and booze. Help us out here! The Jashin follower peered as a hefty number of his coworkers struggled to restrain Takami. The hapless men were fighting a losing battle. Let me go! The fiery woman shouted at the top of her lungs. Her breath stank of alcohol and her voice was slurring pretty badly. Damn faggots, you can't take me on! Well, I'll be, the immortal mused with total apathy ruling his features. She's actually drunk. Wait, he paused and thought before voicing a valid question. How did she become intoxicated? Isn't it obvious? Another guard shouted, she drank too much. I'm a-goin' back home to see my daughter. Let go of me! The tough woman yelled as she elbowed a subordinate in the face and broke his nose. How much did she drink? Fumetsu continued, undaunted by his inebriated commander's random threats and swearing. He knew full well that Takami, no matter how much she drank, never fell under the influence. She emptied one of her 20-liter kegs in one go. Now help us out. 20 liters? Of whiskey? The normally impassive man was mildly surprised. He approached a mass of ninjas trying to overcome their powerful drunken commander to lend a hand. His assistance seemed to make a difference, and the woman began to calm down as she was flattened against the ground under a dog pile. Come on, she whined as she began to fall asleep. Just wanna see my little girl, damn fuckers, let me go, assholes. Her voice trailed off as her altered mindset settled into slumber. The third Hokage was concerned to say the least. He was perched on the roof of the central tower in Konoha overseeing the village in the early moonlight. Earlier in the day, Kakashi gave his report on Team 7's latest mission, and the old man was mildly disturbed to hear about the fox's chakra leaking out at one point. A presence appearing behind him caught his attention, and he turned to address the ANBU member kneeling before him. You summoned me, Lord Hokage? The prone ninja said. Tenzu, Sarutobi began, I'm sure you are aware of a certain demon that resides in a living container? Yes, sir. Good. You are to work with Kakashi Hatake in secret concerning Naruto Uzumaki. Captain Kakashi? Yes. This mission is of utmost priority, so you are to speak of it only with me or Kakashi. Understand? Yes, sir. The aging shinobi nodded in approval. This particular masked man had special talents when it came to chakra suppression. Contact Kakashi for all the information you need. I already informed him of your assistance. Dismissed. With that, the ANBU man shimmered out of view and Sarutobi let out a weary sigh. Naruto, he muttered, I hope that seal's holding out. For all our sakes. It was a red-letter day for Danzo. He was irritated, and that feeling did not occur often in his limited repertoire of emotions. It only reared its head when huge impediments to his goals came along, and now he was faced with such a situation. Several weeks ago, he issued orders for his loyal root ninjas to search and destroy what had been designated as the strongmen that dwelled within the catacombs underneath the village. Since then, one by one, his followers were either disappearing or dying, and he hadn't the faintest idea who was responsible. It's a strange scenario, he mulled over the predicament, the ones that vanished do so without a trace. It's like they never existed at all. He snorted at the irony of the conclusion. His shinobi didn't exist to begin with, and they were truly becoming whispers in the wind. But the ones that turn up dead are horribly mutilated, and their wounds were inflicted by weapons that aren't in Konoha's records. His thoughts were interrupted when he was approached by Koharu and Hamura. The aging duo appeared equally anxious. Any news? Koharu inquired. None as of yet. These strongmen are elusive. We have utilized our own ANBU forces to search for them, Hamura informed. Hopefully our combined forces will drive them out of hiding. The war hawk eyed the elder man. With all due respect, my forces are far more numerous than the troops that are loyal to the village rather than the Hokage. We understand that, but how successful has your superior army been thus far? Danzo glared his retort. He wouldn't admit it, but the old man had a point. After a moment of silence, he changed the subject. What if our forces make contact? Root was supposedly disbanded years ago. That won't be a problem, the aging woman consoled. We've taken great pains to ensure that their search areas are different. But more importantly, what about those you have lost? Why are they dying? If they don't disappear altogether, they are terminated using arms that have yet to be determined. Disappear? Hamura asked. Unknown weaponry? Explain. The injuries inflicted on the retrieved corpses have been made by unconventional weaponry of which no registered shinobi of Konoha uses. The disappearances are simply that. They vanish without any evidence left behind. The old man nodded his head. Troubling, he muttered. I took the liberty of analyzing the scarring on some of your deceased subordinates, the elderly woman stated. I cross-checked them with the wounds from the first victims of the strongmen, and they are noticeably different. The war hawk's eye furrowed. How so? The wounds on the first corpses are swift, clean cuts and scarring indicative of traditional explosives or electrical burns. The more recent injuries are extremely jagged for the most part, and the causes of death are widely varied. I think it's safe to assume we're dealing with at least two groups of strongmen. There are the disappearances to consider as well, Hamura added as his sharp mind kicked into gear. Assuming that the killings are the sole method of operations, we may be dealing with a third strongman organization that prefers abduction. As the aging ninjas discussed their meager findings, an ear listened in from a dark shadow in the corner. They're not legends for nothing, I guess, the hooded individual within the darkness concluded apathetically. No matter. They are but pawns in this game. The next evening, Curse was entertaining himself by weaving through the hive below his hometown. That night, he had found a succession of narrower passages that led progressively towards the surface and took the opportunity to see where they came out. After an hour of careful scurrying, he eventually came upon a long hallway that curved out of view with ladders leading to grates dotting the incredibly lengthy tunnel. Curious, he strode over to the nearest covering and, with a significant push, forced the steel hatch open. He poked his masked head out to find that the entrance was buried a few feet under soft soil and surrounded by tall brush and long, thick flowing grass flowing amidst a forest. This looks familiar, he mused as he scanned the environment. Deciding to take a risk, he exited the hole and ventured out into the woods. After a minute, the pattern of trees clicked in his mind. Oh, these are the training grounds. That's cool, a quick escape if I ever need it. Another minute passed as he trekked through the dense undergrowth, rapidly growing bored with the unveiled secret. He harbored thoughts of returning to the hidden tunnel when he heard the distinct sound of metal striking wood. Curiosity got the better of him, and he silently made his way to the noise. After a few moments, he came across the source and his lips split into a grin. Well, look who's here, he thought as his mirrored gaze found Sasuke Uchiha practicing advanced kunai techniques out in the open alone. Naruto wondered if he should act on the sudden impulse to beat the so-called genius into a carpet stain when he unconsciously shifted his weight, and his foot snapped a strained fallen branch. "Who's there?" the moody boy demanded as he spun on his heel and instinctively launched the knives in his hands at the source of the sudden noise. "I know you're there. Show yourself." Curse's mostly hidden features contorted into a wild smile and he stepped out from his poor cover, the metal loops of the kunai wrapped around his fingers. Well, well. Look who we have here, Sasuke Uchiha. "How do you know my name?" the preteen demanded, staying cool and collected as he drew more bladed weapons to threaten the stranger. "Who are you?" "Call me Curse. You know, I'm quite a big fan of yours." When the blonde saw the dark-haired boy's eyebrow raise in a questioning gesture, he chuckled and continued, "Oh yes, it's true. The last survivor of the infamous Uchiha massacre. Word has it that your Sharingan's been activated, too. I look forward to seeing your future performances." "Is there a reason you're here?" Sasuke's guard never faltered. "Well, yes and no." He began tapping his wood and metal sandal against the ground casually as he assumed a relaxed stance. "I was just passing by when I noticed you were here and decided to take a look. Why have I never seen you before? Who are you really?" I'm no one suspicious, really. It's just that I like hiding from this village because I'm too awesome for their comprehension." The brooding preteen smirked unpleasantly. "Sounds like something that loser Naruto would say." Said blonde liked where the conversation was going and decided to bait the genius into a fight. "Naruto? Oh, that's right. Naruto Uzumaki, one of your teammates. Now he's got talent waiting to come out." "Che. That loser? Are you kidding? He's hopeless. He'll only get in my way." "I think you misunderstood me, Uchiha," he emphasized to get his insult across. "I was implying that he has more innate talent than you. I thought you'd get the idea from my choice of words." "What?" He was starting to become irate. "You heard me. I've seen your past performances. You're arrogant, self-centered, and clueless. You don't understand the underlying concepts of teamwork and you're a showboater. You think everyone else is below you just because you're an Uchiha. What do you know?" His voice was turning dark and his knuckles turned white from his tight grip. "What the hell do you know?" "I know that in terms of a shinobi you're worthless. All you got is a Sharingan, and you can't even use it the right way." "Shut up." He tossed a handful of kunai at the masked genius and moved his hands through the necessary seals for a fire technique. As the stranger easily dodged the knives, he reeled back to collect the chakra in his chest and lurched forward, spitting an enormous ball of flames out. He smirked when he saw the mobile conflagration engulf the insulting man, and he turned to leave. "Where are you going?" Sasuke shot around and peered at the opponent who should have been burned to a crisp only to find him casually strolling towards him inside a diminishing swirling pillar of water. The Uchiha cursed under his breath and activated his bloodline. "There we go!" Curse exclaimed when the boy's pupils changed colors and drew his preferred ninjato from its seal. "Now let me see what you can do with those eyes." The moody preteen shot forward in a zigzag pattern, throwing out kunai and shuriken towards the enemy as he went. His superior sight easily saw the masked man's sword swivel and turn to easily bat away the weapons, and he pulled out a special pair of throwing stars with attached wires. He then leapt back from his random charge and threw the projectiles with purpose. Using his Sharingan, he manipulated the shuriken through the wires and wrapped the undercover genius to a nearby post. He collected the metal strands in one hand and prepared to breathe fire down the line when his body suddenly jolted back. Naruto had calmly grasped the binding cords with 2 fingers and sent a surge of lightning chakra down them. He wasn't especially attuned to that element, but his dealings with Silence's near-constant electrical attacks forced him to become proficient with it. "Come on," he taunted as the lines went slack and he casually freed himself by walking forward. "Where's that great Uchiha talent everyone talks about?" "Shut up!" Sasuke yelled as he blew another intense fireball at the approaching man. This time, however, he followed up the attack by unsheathing a pair of demon wind shuriken and lobbing them into the retreating flames. To his dismay, everything passed through unhindered, leaving behind a pile of smoking dirt as the large throwing stars embedded themselves into a distant tree. "Not even close," a voice stated in his ear, causing him to reel around, throwing out a backhand and a kick simultaneously behind him, only to have the limbs caught and a cold feeling wrap around them before encasing the remainder of his body. His movement was restricted by what he realized was an extensive chain attached to a sickle, and he fell to the ground, unable to summon the chakra to substitute his body with something else. How did you do that?" he shouted at the mirror-eyed crimson mask staring down at him. "I was watching you the whole time. You had no opportunities." "Shut up and listen," Curse said solemnly as he pressed his straight weapon's blade to the Uchiha's neck while holding the curved short sword in his other hand. "You want to know how I beat you? Remember when I was tapping my foot during our little conversation?" He took Sasuke's angry glare for a yes. "I was forming earth clones with my chakra that way. When your second fireball hit me, I switched my body with the closest one and hit you from behind. He squatted to bring his face closer to the preteen, sputtering with rage, and continued as calmly as he could muster. I fought a 9-year-old with severe psychological problems not too long ago, and had more problems then than with you. I haven't even broken a sweat in this little practice run. How dare you! Naruto leaned in until his mask was 2 inches away from the defeated opponent's face. Shut up, weakling. You're a damn fool if you think that Sharingan will solve all your problems. I don't even have any special bloodline and I moved, 20 feet? Until your arrogance subsides, you will always be a weak little boy. Remember this. Sasuke grit his teeth so hard he threatened to crack them into pieces. As pissed as he was, this stranger that had beaten him so easily had rule of the floor. He merely stared daggers into the genius until the guy stood up. Oh, and one more thing, the winner addressed him. If you tell anyone of this little midnight sparring or about our little talk, I will kill you without hesitation. Load of crap, he muttered to the side. Don't be so quick to judge. I didn't even have time to sweat during the match. Remember that. With that, Curse disappeared in a puff of smoke, chain and all. At that moment, the Uchiha got to his feet and made his way home. He tried to blow off everything his opponent said, but the enemy's words echoed in his mind. Weakling. As Naruto backtracked through the extensive hive to return home, he felt a massive load of stress melting away. Oh yeah! He cheered mentally. I kicked his ass. That'll teach him. He was on cloud 9, so much so that as he re-entered the large vertical hub he didn't immediately notice the other presence in the huge chamber. He suddenly became aware of someone else when he saw movement approaching him from the corner of his hidden azure eyes. Whoa, shit! He yelped in surprise as he slid into a low stance and released his favorite sword. Hang on, a pair of upturned palms was the first thing he saw as Silence spoke. I'm not here to fight this time. Sure you're not, Curse replied sarcastically, eyeing his rival and noting the changes in her uniform. There was a rectangular slit crossing her blue mask's mouthpiece, and the explosive stake launchers on her right arm looked different. She also wore some kind of wavy spring-operated blade in a gauntlet on her left arm, and she was missing that energy weapon that damn near burned a hole through him. What do you want? We've got visitors down here. Tell me something I don't know. I've already been attacked. He conveniently left out that there were 2 parties involved and that he took a 9-year-old girl prisoner. Same here, but there were 2 separate groups. The blonde's eyes furrowed behind his crimson mask. Her too? This could be big. He eased his guard and continued the conversation. You got any news on them? Her covered head shook with a slight shrug. A 3-man team of masked guys that looked like ANBU and a lone fighter. Umbu? How do you know that? I don't think they are. I think they're part of Root. I see Root's supposedly not around anymore. Yep. We're better to hide than down here. She held her arms out to gesture at the cavernous room around them. You said a lone fighter came after them? Yeah, a Jashin follower. This caught Naruto off guard. He was surprised that his arch-nemesis knew the identity of her secondary enemy as well as the fact that she was sharing information so freely with him. Jashin, eh? You sure know a lot. He had friends too. I had to book it before they took his body away. I think these other guys are a threat to the village. The Uzumaki was beginning to see the similarities in their separate situations. Silence was coming to the same conclusions as him. And how do you figure that? Hinata was getting frustrated at the interrogation. She was trying to build a temporary alliance between them by sharing what she knew freely, and Curse was making it as difficult as he could. The head of the Root organization is an old fart by the name of Danzo. He's an ancient warmonger who believes in protecting the village at any cost. If the Jashin guy was on another side, then there could be an enemy presence around here. The red mane fitted over the blonde's head fluttered in the air as he nodded in agreement. I think you're right. I was also attacked by a 3-man Root cell and a single ninja operating independently. I managed to capture the new enemy, and am still in the process of interrogation. Really? The Hyuga replied with mild surprise in her voice. What have you figured out so far? Apparently their commander's name is Takami, and she's taking orders from a higher power. He sighed. My prisoner's just a foot soldier and doesn't really know anything more than that. Silence's head cocked to the side. How about where their base is? No good either. They didn't pay attention to their surroundings. What? Your prisoner doesn't have a place to report back? Curse stood in silence as he processed what the female prodigy meant. Oh my God! He smacked his visage with his free hand. I can't believe I didn't think of that. The girl laughed at her rival's foul-up. Wow, you aren't very good at interrogation, are you? Shut up. He commanded, only earning more laughter from her. She sighed as her jovialness subsided. That's great. Anyway, she took on a good-natured friendly tone. I propose that we join forces until we eliminate this threat. She held out a hand covered in electric film. Naruto stared at the extended limb as if it were a giant worm. Hell, why not? He concluded as he put a minuscule amount of faith in his intelligent nemesis and pressed his hand into hers to complete the agreement. But only until this shit blows over, agreed? The blue-haired preteen smiled behind her mask. Wouldn't expect anything less. She broke the handshake and her head swiveled around when her activated Byakugan noticed something. Well, ain't that sweet? A condescending voice echoed from above. Looks like I hit the jackpot. The sun rose into the sky to announce another day in the ninja village, much to Hinata's dismay. She had pulled yet another all-nighter the previous evening, straining herself in her search for information on the strange suit-clad man who detected her camera. How can there be nothing on this guy? She wondered as she took an out-of-the-way route to rendezvous with her novice squad. Seriously, there's a vacuum of data on him. No one except Danzo even knew the guy was there, and he sure as hell didn't look like a shinobi. What does that mean? Lost in her thoughts, she forgot that she wasn't in the catacombs beneath her feet and walked with her arms folded behind her head while her hands cradled the back of her skull. She let loose a yawn produced from 48 hours of hard-working sleeplessness, not worried that anyone saw her. The alley she was strolling down was deserted anyway, or at least as far as her weary mind could tell. Kurenai hid in the shadows watching her student, relying on her full arsenal of stealth techniques to ensure that her blue-haired pupil wouldn't detect her. She only hoped that the girl didn't activate her bloodline and render all her efforts in vain. As she spied on her student, she was shocked to find her behaving uncouthly. What's this? Hinata Hyuga stretching and yawning in broad daylight? When did she pick this up? As she continued to tail the girl, she witnessed the prim and proper heiress perform unfamiliar acts such as lazily glancing around with glazed-over lavender eyes, scratching herself wherever she felt an itch, and even picking her nose once before flinging the findings away. They're all small things, but she's never done any of this before. What happened to her? The Yuhi followed the undercover genius for a while longer until she ran out of alleyways in which to reside, deciding to take one last look at her charge before rushing off to the meeting point. She felt the impulse for her jaw to drop and resisted when the Hyuga emerged from the final alley into a populated street, and became shy and withdrawn again. Alright, something's up. This isn't right. Hinata's acting un-Hinata-like when no one's around. Now how should I look into this? She blinked a few times and realized that moment was not an appropriate time for such musings. I'll figure it out later. If I'm late, she'll suspect something. She broke her overlapping techniques and took a swift route to the rendezvous location. As Genin Team 7 made their way back to Konoha, Naruto was busy plotting his next course of action as curse. I should look into medical techniques, he pondered, having ordered a trio of clones to dig up Haku's body, drain all the remaining blood into a sterile container, and rebury the corpse the evening the ice user was housed in his final resting place. Course, that stuff's not my strong point. As much as I hate to admit it, I'll bet silence could pull a secret or two out of that bloodline as things stand right now. He accidentally cracked a humble grin at the thought of his intelligent rival, but caught himself in time to make his mouth explode into a smile and enthusiastically asked Sakura out on a date, which she thankfully refused. In accordance with his well-known mask, he whined about her choice when Sasuke muttered his 2 cents and got the blonde engaged in another mental rant against the Uchiha. That arrogant son of a bitch, he thought, barely checking the urge to knock the so-called genius flat on his ass. Ever since he activated his Sharingan, he's been more of an asshole than ever. He would have planned on acting on his dislike for the boy, except doing so could potentially jeopardize his cover. He had never seen the withdrawn preteen in a truly private place during the late evening hours, the only times the Uzumaki would even think to consider venturing outdoors. Ah well, let him have his fun for a while. It sure as hell won't last. The gates of his home village came into view above the tree line and he entered what he affectionately referred to as mechanical mode, the mind-numbingly monotonous pattern of being a blonde, loud-mouthed fool for the sake of the city's peace of mind. He went through the motions, reported with his team to the Hokage, ate lunch at Ichiraku's while bragging about how awesome he was to IM, trained for a few hours until dusk, and then headed home. Of course, the day was only beginning when he stepped foot inside his crappy apartment. He immediately battened down the hatches, checking all his traps and alarms to be sure they held up during his absence, and making sure not a soul was watching before he descended the hidden vertical passage. He entered his secret chamber, and was pleased to find it as he left it. He strolled over to the small metal dump built into the farthest corner of the spacey room and gathered up a few panels of tin and iron. Casting a small fire-based technique, he heated the metal sheet's edges and promptly made a box with a simple hinged lid. As he unsealed the container with Haku's blood from one of the seals in his back, he performed a basic ice move to significantly cool down the new makeshift refrigerator before placing the plasma samples inside and locking it shut. I've got to prepare some seals to keep this thing cold. Well, that or build a generator. He pondered the minor quandary for a moment, and decided the generator would be more suitable for the task. He returned to the miniature scrapyard and began picking through the random pieces of metal when a steel door caught the corner of his eye. His head turned to gaze at the secure passage, and he remembered what it was for. Oh yeah, I've got a prisoner now. I wonder if she's still alive? The blonde genius strode up to the heavy door while donning his mask and unlocked the numerous bolts before swinging the hunk of steel inward. You alive in there? He called with a casual, underlying tone. Ah. A pair of brown eyes shot over to him with a deer in the headlights look. See curse. You'll be back. I'll take that as a yes. He strolled up to the gates and glared down at her as she sat cross-legged on the rough stone floor. Looks like you went through all those rations. She said nothing, peering down as if ashamed. Her behavior really reminded him of the chronically shy Hyuga, Hinata. I thought up some more questions while I was away. Now you're gonna answer 'em, right? Catching the slight nod of her head, he continued. Were you ever contracted by a man named Gato? Who? She looked up with genuine puzzlement across her stained features. Strike that from the list. He decided to give her his reasoning. He's a businessman who hires rogue ninjas. What I really want to know is if you are a missing ninja. She returned a blank gaze at him before shaking her head with uncertainty. I don't think so, Commander Takami W wouldn't take orders F from someone weaker than her. Curse's eyebrow raised behind the mirrored lenses of his red visage. Someone stronger than your commander? Shia nodded. Let me guess, the same person giving her orders is also the same guy you've never seen or heard of before. Her head hung in defeat. Why yes. The undercover genius sighed. All right then. What's your commander like? Well, she's very crude, but she's very nice to me. How about techniques, weaknesses, personality quirks? She stumbled against the rapid-fire interrogation. I've never seen her in sea combat, but she does like to drink and smoke a lot. That it? She swears a lot too. My god, Naruto mentally laid his head in his hand. She's obedient, but she doesn't know squat. Wait, she could have had interrogation training. Could I be asking the wrong questions? Could she be fooling me entirely? He eyed her while he mused internally and decided to test her. He leaned towards the bars and slammed a palm against the metal rods. Quit fucking around. He shouted angrily, don't waste my damn time. If you're not gonna be useful, I may as well walk out that door and never come back. The young girl reeled back in fright when he began yelling and tears welled up in her brown eyes. But I am not lying. She pleaded with a particularly nasty stutter. She tried to stand and approach the bars but fell over due to the short chains around her legs. I am not lying. She bawled, the waterworks beginning to flow at full capacity. The Uzumaki wondered if she really was clueless. If she was, then who in their right mind would employ an underling that was so fragile? Then why can't you answer half my questions? He toned his voice down. I've gotten very little useful information out of you so far. Why is that? She choked as her tears impeded speech and sputtered. I am just a FF front line SSS soldier. I am not told anything you outside my mission. She continued to weep heavily on the ground. Ah damn, the blonde sighed. His instincts told him that she was honest to God ignorant of the important issues behind her leader's command structure. His conscience was also tugging at him for placing her in such a panicked state for a fruitless reason. Come here, he ordered calmly as he knelt down. What? She sniffled as she fought hard to stifle the tears. Come over here, he repeated. Why? She continued, fear lining her voice. What are you going to do to me? Just come here, he said calmly. Have I actually hurt you yet? Shia hesitated for a few moments as she attempted to calm herself, and slowly brought herself to her feet. She shuffled over to her captor with resigned apprehension in her features and winced when he made a sudden movement when she approached him. Feeling the flesh on her ankle suddenly breathing again, she cracked her eyes open and peered down. What are you doing? Curse said nothing as he pulled the shackles off her feet and tossed them outside the prison against the uneven rock wall. Reward, he stated simply as he rose and glanced down to meet her gaze. If your commander's nice to you, then I might have a use for you yet. He backed off a few feet, then turned on his heel to make for the heavy steel door. I'll feed you later, he informed her as he proceeded to shut the heavy entrance and lock it. Before the door closed, the imprisoned girl collected herself as best she could and yelled, Thank you. Naruto reinstated the final lock and turned back to stare at his metal dump. What the hell am I doing? He muttered before continuing his current project of building a small generator. Hinata leaned back in her chair and let a profound yawn loose from her soft lips. She had been at this new endeavor for a week straight, and only now was it beginning to show any results. She decided after her brief encounter with the stranger in the blue suit that she needed some new weaponry in her arsenal. She had determined that her next armaments would need to be highly explosive yet numerous, seeing as how she had a Jashin follower running loose in the underground hive in which she resided. Her first choice was to construct small fragile marbles that contained a highly unstable chemical substance that would explode if jarred, but that turned out to be too unpredictable for her tastes. She then tried injecting the volatile liquid into hollowed-out needles, but the explosive yield was too pitiful for combat. Her final solution was to strip away an outermost casing from the needles, wrap exploding tags around them, then replace the sheared metal back over the slips of lethal paper for a shrapnel effect. She tested the first few prototypes with large degrees of success, but the actual process of merging the shinobi tools was insanely time-consuming. After constructing a laughably small amount of the explosive slivers by hand in a few days' time, she built a simple machine that could do it automatically. However, she had to reduce the device's speed in order to exponentially reduce the number of errors it made. While her machinations were doing better than her, it wasn't by much, so she built a dozen of the accursed machines to accomplish the job. But now that production of the supercharged projectiles was in full swing, she could concentrate on their delivery system. She had a handful of ideas ranging from upgrading her current equipment to creating new devices from the get-go. She took a seat at her desk and began working out a few schematics when she glanced over to find her concentrated energy weapon laying peacefully in its holster, ready for combat. I don't know if that damn thing's brilliant or a piece of crap, she wondered. No matter how many times I improve it, the insides still melt after 2 or 3 shots. It's so unreliable. And the power consumption. I'll bet if I hooked that thing up to the Konoha power grid I could cause a blackout. She chuckled at the last thought, and filed it under the for a rainy day experiments. She continued working vigorously until she came up with 2 plans involving her new needles that she found the most feasible. Quickly scribbling down the math involved, she stood and made her way to her main workstation and began assembling the required parts. This is gonna be great, she quietly exclaimed to herself with an unavoidable sense of victory rising in her stomach. Fumetsu! A patrolman yelled as the undying man entered the chamber that reeked of cigarettes and booze. Help us out here! The Jashin follower peered as a hefty number of his coworkers struggled to restrain Takami. The hapless men were fighting a losing battle. Let me go! The fiery woman shouted at the top of her lungs. Her breath stank of alcohol and her voice was slurring pretty badly. Damn faggots, you can't take me on! Well, I'll be, the immortal mused with total apathy ruling his features. She's actually drunk. Wait, he paused in thought before voicing a valid question. How did she become intoxicated? Isn't it obvious? Another guard shouted, she drank too much. I'm a-goin' back home to see my daughter. Let go of me! The tough woman yelled as she elbowed a subordinate in the face and broke his nose. How much did she drink? Fumetsu continued, undaunted by his inebriated commander's random threats and swearing. He knew full well that Takami, no matter how much she drank, never fell under the influence. She emptied one of her 20-liter kegs in one go. Now help us out. 20 liters? Of whiskey? The normally impassive man was mildly surprised. He approached a mass of ninjas trying to overcome their powerful drunken commander to lend a hand. His assistance seemed to make a difference, and the woman began to calm down as she was flattened against the ground under a dog pile. Come on, she whined as she began to fall asleep. Just wanna see my little girl, damn fuckers, let me go, assholes. Her voice trailed off as her altered mindset settled into slumber. The third Hokage was concerned, to say the least. He was perched on the roof of the central tower in Konoha overseeing the village in the early moonlight. Earlier in the day, Kakashi gave his report on Team 7's latest mission, and the old man was mildly disturbed to hear about the fox's chakra leaking out at one point. A presence appearing behind him caught his attention, and he turned to address the ANBU member kneeling before him. You summoned me, Lord Hokage? The prone ninja said. Tenzu, Sarutobi began, I'm sure you are aware of a certain demon that resides in a living container? Yes, sir. Good. You are to work with Kakashi Hatake in secret concerning Naruto Uzumaki. Captain Kakashi? Yes. This mission is of utmost priority, so you are to speak of it only with me or Kakashi. Understand? Yes, sir. The aging shinobi nodded in approval. This particular masked man had special talents when it came to chakra suppression. Contact Kakashi for all the information you need. I already informed him of your assistance. Dismissed. With that, the ANBU man shimmered out of view and Sarutobi let out a weary sigh. Naruto, he muttered, I hope that seal's holding out. For all our sakes. It was a red-letter day for Danzo. He was irritated, and that feeling did not occur often in his limited repertoire of emotions. It only reared its head when huge impediments to his goals came along, and now he was faced with such a situation. Several weeks ago, he issued orders for his loyal root ninjas to search and destroy what had been designated as the strongmen that dwelled within the catacombs underneath the village. Since then, one by one, his followers were either disappearing or dying, and he hadn't the faintest idea who was responsible. It's a strange scenario, he mulled over the predicament, the ones that vanished do so without a trace. It's like they never existed at all. He snorted at the irony of the conclusion. His shinobi didn't exist to begin with, and they were truly becoming whispers in the wind. but the ones that turn up dead are horribly mutilated, and their wounds were inflicted by weapons that aren't in Konoha's records. His thoughts were interrupted when he was approached by Koharu and Hamura. The aging duo appeared equally anxious. Any news? Koharu inquired. None as of yet. These strongmen are elusive. We have utilized our own ANBU forces to search for them, Hamura informed. Hopefully our combined forces will drive them out of hiding. The war hawk eyed the elder man. With all due respect, my forces are far more numerous than the troops that are loyal to the village rather than the Hokage. We understand that, but how successful has your superior army been thus far? Danzo glared his retort. He wouldn't admit it, but the old man had a point. After a moment of silence, he changed the subject. What if our forces make contact? Root was supposedly disbanded years ago. That won't be a problem, the aging woman consoled. We've taken great pains to ensure that their search areas are different. But more importantly, what about those you have lost? Why are they dying? If they don't disappear altogether, they are terminated using arms that have yet to be determined. Disappear? Hamura asked. Unknown weaponry? Explain. The injuries inflicted on the retrieved corpses have been made by unconventional weaponry of which no registered shinobi of Konoha uses. The disappearances are simply that. They vanish without any evidence left behind. The old man nodded his head. Troubling, he muttered. I took the liberty of analyzing the scarring on some of your deceased subordinates, the elderly woman stated. I cross-checked them with the wounds from the first victims of the strongmen, and they are noticeably different. The warhawk's eye furrowed. How so? The wounds on the first corpses are swift, clean cuts and scarring indicative of traditional explosives or electrical burns. The more recent injuries are extremely jagged for the most part, and the causes of death are widely varied. I think it's safe to assume we're dealing with at least two groups of strongmen. There are the disappearances to consider as well, Hamura added as his sharp mind kicked into gear. Assuming that the killings are the sole method of operations, we may be dealing with a third strongman organization that prefers abduction. As the aging ninjas discussed their meager findings, an ear listened in from a dark shadow in the corner. They're not legends for nothing, I guess, the hooded individual within the darkness concluded apathetically. No matter. They are but pawns in this game. The next evening, Curse was entertaining himself by weaving through the hive below his hometown. That night, he had found a succession of narrower passages that led progressively towards the surface and took the opportunity to see where they came out. After an hour of careful scurrying, he eventually came upon a long hallway that curved out of view with ladders leading to grates dotting the incredibly lengthy tunnel. Curious, he strode over to the nearest covering and, with a significant push, forced the steel hatch open. He poked his masthead out to find that the entrance was buried a few feet under soft soil and surrounded by tall brush and long, thick flowing grass flowing amidst a forest. This looks familiar, he mused as he scanned the environment. Deciding to take a risk, he exited the hole and ventured out into the woods. After a minute, the pattern of trees clicked in his mind. Oh, these are the training grounds. That's cool, a quick escape if I ever need it. Another minute passed as he trekked through the dense undergrowth, rapidly growing bored with the unveiled secret. He harbored thoughts of returning to the hidden tunnel when he heard the distinct sound of metal striking wood. Curiosity got the better of him, and he silently made his way to the noise. After a few moments, he came across the source and his lips split into a grin. Well, look who's here, he thought as his mirrored gaze found Sasuke Uchiha practicing advanced kunai techniques out in the open alone. Naruto wondered if he should act on the sudden impulse to beat the so-called genius into a carpet stain when he unconsciously shifted his weight, and his foot snapped a strained fallen branch. Who's there? The moody boy demanded as he spun on his heel and instinctively launched the knives in his hands at the source of the sudden noise. I know you're there. Show yourself. Curse's mostly hidden features contorted into a wild smile and he stepped out from his poor cover, the metal loops of the kunai wrapped around his fingers. Well, look who we have here, Sasuke Uchiha. How do you know my name? The preteen demanded, staying cool and collected as he drew more bladed weapons to threaten the stranger. Who are you? Call me Curse. You know, I'm quite a big fan of yours. When the blonde saw the dark-haired boy's eyebrow raise in a questioning gesture, he chuckled and continued, Oh yes, it's true. The last survivor of the infamous Uchiha massacre. Word has it that your Sharingan's been activated too. I look forward to seeing your future performances. Is there a reason you're here? Sasuke's guard never faltered. Well, yes and no. He began tapping his wood and metal sandal against the ground casually as he assumed a relaxed stance. I was just passing by when I noticed you were here and decided to take a look. Why have I never seen you before? Who are you really? I'm no one suspicious, really. It's just that I like hiding from this village because I'm too awesome for their comprehension. The brooding preteen smirked unpleasantly. Sounds like something that loser Naruto would say. Said Blonde liked where the conversation was going and decided to bait the genius into a fight. Naruto? Oh, that's right. Naruto Uzumaki, one of your teammates. Now he's got talent waiting to come out. Che. That loser? Are you kidding? He's hopeless. He'll only get in my way. I think you misunderstood me, Uchiha, he emphasized to get his insult across. I was implying that he has more innate talent than you. I thought you'd get the idea from my choice of words. What? He was starting to become irate. You heard me. I've seen your past performances. You're arrogant, self-centered, and clueless. You don't understand the underlying concepts of teamwork and you're a showboater. You think everyone else is below you just because you're an Uchiha. What do you know? His voice was turning dark and his knuckles turned white from his tight grip. What the hell do you know? I know that in terms of a shinobi you're worthless. All you got is a Sharingan, and you can't even use it the right way. Shut up. He tossed a handful of kunai at the masked genius and moved his hands through the necessary seals for a fire technique. As the stranger easily dodged the knives, he reeled back to collect the chakra in his chest and lurched forward, spitting an enormous ball of flames out. He smirked when he saw the mobile conflagration engulf the insulting man, and he turned to leave. Where are you going? Sasuke shot around and peered at the opponent who should have been burnt to a crisp only to find him casually strolling towards him inside a diminishing swirling pillar of water. The Uchiha cursed under his breath and activated his bloodline. There we go! Curse exclaimed when the boy's pupils changed colors and drew his preferred ninjato from its seal. Now let me see what you can do with those eyes. The moody preteen shot forward in a zigzag pattern, throwing out kunai and shuriken towards the enemy as he went. His superior sight easily saw the masked man's sword swivel and turn to easily bat away the weapons, and he pulled out a special pair of throwing stars with attached wires. He then leapt back from his random charge and threw the projectiles with purpose. Using his Sharingan, he manipulated the shuriken through the wires and wrapped the undercover genius to a nearby post. He collected the metal strands in one hand and prepared to breathe fire down the line when his body suddenly jolted back. Naruto had calmly grasped the binding cords with 2 fingers and sent a surge of lightning chakra down them. He wasn't especially attuned to that element, but his dealings with Silence's near-constant electrical attacks forced him to become proficient with it. Come on, he taunted as the lines went slack and he casually freed himself by walking forward. Where's that great Uchiha talent everyone talks about? Shut up! Sasuke yelled as he blew another intense fireball at the approaching man. This time, however, he followed up the attack by unsheathing a pair of demon wind shuriken and lobbing them into the retreating flames. To his dismay, everything passed through unhindered, leaving behind a pile of smoking dirt as the large throwing stars embedded themselves into a distant tree. Not even close, a voice stated in his ear, causing him to reel around, throwing out a backhand and a kick simultaneously behind him, only to have the limbs caught and a cold feeling wrap around them before encasing the remainder of his body. His movement was restricted by what he realized was an extensive chain attached to a sickle, and he fell to the ground, unable to summon the chakra to substitute his body with something else. How did you do that? He shouted at the mirror-eyed crimson mask staring down at him. I was watching you the whole time. You had no opportunities. Shut up and listen, Curse said solemnly as he pressed his straight weapon's blade to the Uchiha's neck while holding the curved short sword in his other hand. You want to know how I beat you? Remember when I was tapping my foot during our little conversation? He took Sasuke's angry glare for a yes. I was forming earth clones with my chakra that way. When your second fireball hit me, I switched my body with the closest one and hit you from behind. He squatted to bring his face closer to the preteen, sputtering with rage, and continued as calmly as he could muster. I fought a 9-year-old with severe psychological problems not too long ago, and had more problems then than with you. I haven't even broken a sweat in this little practice run. How dare you! Naruto leaned in until his mask was 2 inches away from the defeated opponent's face. Shut up, weakling. You're a damn fool if you think that Sharingan will solve all your problems. I don't even have any special bloodline and I moved, 20 feet? Until your arrogance subsides, you will always be a weak little boy. Remember this. Sasuke grit his teeth so hard he threatened to crack them into pieces. As pissed as he was, this stranger that had beaten him so easily had rule of the floor. He merely stared daggers into the genius until the guy stood up. Oh, and one more thing, the winner addressed him. If you tell anyone of this little midnight sparring or about our little talk, I will kill you without hesitation. Load of crap, he muttered to the side. Don't be so quick to judge. I didn't even have time to sweat during the match. Remember that. With that, Curse disappeared in a puff of smoke, chain and all. At that moment, the Uchiha got to his feet and made his way home. He tried to blow off everything his opponent said, but the enemy's words echoed in his mind. Weakling. As Naruto backtracked through the extensive hive to return home, he felt a massive load of stress melting away. Oh yeah! He cheered mentally. I kicked his ass. That'll teach him. He was on cloud 9, So much so that as he re-entered the large vertical hub he didn't immediately notice the other presence in the huge chamber. He suddenly became aware of someone else when he saw movement approaching him from the corner of his hidden azure eyes. Whoa, shit! He yelped in surprise as he slid into a low stance and released his favorite sword. Hang on, a pair of upturned palms was the first thing he saw as Silence spoke. I'm not here to fight this time. Sure you're not, Curse replied sarcastically, eyeing his rival and noting the changes in her uniform. There was a rectangular slit crossing her blue mask's mouthpiece, and the explosive stake launchers on her right arm looked different. She also wore some kind of wavy spring-operated blade in a gauntlet on her left arm, and she was missing that energy weapon that damn near burned a hole through him. What do you want? We've got visitors down here. Tell me something I don't know. I've already been attacked. He conveniently left out that there were two parties involved and that he took a 9-year-old girl prisoner. Same here, but there were two separate groups. The blonde's eyes furrowed behind his crimson mask. Her too? This could be big. He eased his guard and continued the conversation. You got any news on them? Her covered head shook with a slight shrug. A 3-man team of masked guys that looked like ANBU and a lone fighter. Umbu? How do you know that? I don't think they are. I think they're part of Root. I see Root's supposedly not around anymore. Yep. We're better to hide than down here. She held her arms out to gesture at the cavernous room around them. You said a lone fighter came after them? Yeah, a Jashin follower. This caught Naruto off guard. He was surprised that his arch-nemesis knew the identity of her secondary enemy as well as the fact that she was sharing information so freely with him. Jashin, eh? You sure know a lot. He had friends too. I had to book it before they took his body away. I think these other guys are a threat to the village. The Uzumaki was beginning to see the similarities in their separate situations. Silence was coming to the same conclusions as him. And how do you figure that? Hinata was getting frustrated at the interrogation. She was trying to build a temporary alliance between them by sharing what she knew freely, and Curse was making it as difficult as he could. The head of the Root organization is an old fart by the name of Danzo. He's an ancient warmonger who believes in protecting the village at any cost. If the Jashin guy was on another side, then there could be an enemy presence around here. The red mane fitted over the blonde's head fluttered in the air as he nodded in agreement. I think you're right. I was also attacked by a 3-man Root cell and a single ninja operating independently. I managed to capture the new enemy, and am still in the process of interrogation. Really? The Hyuga replied with mild surprise in her voice. What have you figured out so far? Apparently their commander's name is Takami, and she's taking orders from a higher power. He sighed. My prisoner's just a foot soldier and doesn't really know anything more than that. Silence's head cocked to the side. How about where their base is? No good either. They didn't pay attention to their surroundings. What? Your prisoner doesn't have a place to report back? Curse stood in silence as he processed what the female prodigy meant. Oh my God! He smacked his visage with his free hand. I can't believe I didn't think of that. The girl laughed at her rival's foul-up. Wow, you aren't very good at interrogation, are you? Shut up. He commanded, only earning more laughter from her. She sighed as her jovialness subsided. That's great. Anyway, she took on a good-natured friendly tone. I propose that we join forces until we eliminate this threat. She held out a hand covered in electric film. Naruto stared at the extended limb as if it were a giant worm. Hell, why not? He concluded as he put a minuscule amount of faith in his intelligent nemesis and pressed his hand into hers to complete the agreement. But only until this shit blows over, agreed? The blue-haired preteen smiled behind her mask. Wouldn't expect anything less. She broke the handshake and her head swiveled around when her activated Byakugan noticed something. Well, ain't that sweet? A condescending voice echoed from above. Looks like I hit the jackpot. Shit! Both geniuses swore in unison as they glanced upwards to find a man sitting atop the bridge over their heads. The enemy leapt down and landed smoothly a dozen meters away from them. The ninja had dull, slick crimson hair and eyes to match. His uniform consisted of a bulky light gray jacket with matching pants that were held on by an embroidered rope sloppily tied off to the side. As he turned towards his foes, the light bouncing off the walls shone off the smooth metal shin guards connected to his gray sandals as well as the steel gauntlets over his arms that possessed rows upon rows of increasingly larger jagged blades that ended in double-edged ragged sickles protruding from behind the wrists. So good to meet ya. The frightening shinobi introduced himself with an unpleasant smile. My codename is Giza, and I've been instructed to kill you. Shit! Both geniuses swore in unison as they glanced upwards to find a man sitting atop the bridge over their heads. The enemy leapt down and landed smoothly a dozen meters away from them. The ninja had dull, slick crimson hair and eyes to match. His uniform consisted of a bulky light gray jacket with matching pants that were held on by an embroidered rope sloppily tied off to the side. As he turned towards his foes, the light bouncing off the walls shone off the smooth metal shin guards connected to his gray sandals as well as the steel gauntlets over his arms that possessed rows upon rows of increasingly larger jagged blades that ended in double-edged ragged sickles protruding from behind the wrists. "So good to meet ya." The frightening shinobi introduced himself with an unpleasant smile. "My codename is Giza, and I've been instructed to kill you." What if Naruto and Hinata prodigy couple? And thanks for watching my video till the end. If you enjoyed this content, then do consider subscribing to my channel. And leave a like if you guys need the next part, comment down, and thanks for watching the video, and see you guys in the next video.